Chapter 83. Miss, it's time to go to school. The next morning, Xiaowu shouted outside the door. Yesterday, they knew that Su Li was not a first-class lecturer at all, but a more advanced special class lecturer. In the mouth of students, it was also called the special class. After getting the news, they were so excited that they didn't fall asleep at midnight. It turned out that they only thought they followed an ordinary lecturer because of Su Li's age. They didn't expect that she was a special class lecturer. When they thought that when the administrator of the school came to recruit, other manservants were unwilling to go, they couldn't help laughing. Su Li got up very early to practice. At this moment, when she heard the shout outside the door, she calmly put on the clothes of the special class lecturer and walked out empty-handed. Seeing a small carriage and Xiaowu waiting beside the carriage, she nodded slightly. The special class school was a little far, and her clothes were too ostentatious. It was better to sit in the carriage. After a while, the horse stopped with a neigh. Su Li got off the station and came to the special class school. Feng Qingru said that it was called Nuanfeng Pavilion. There is only one school. There are no walls on all sides, and all the windows could be used as walls. The structure was very delicate. It was made by Mo Jiamo, the first craftsman in the Qinghe province. Su Li told Xiaowu to wait outside the courtyard. Then she opened the door and walked in. In the next moment, 4 people looked at her. Su Li calmly walked to the teacher's table and glanced at the 4 people under the table. She recognized one of them. It was Gongmin. Gongmin saw Su Li and nodded slightly to say hello. Su Li nodded gently and turned her head. The first thing that came into her sight was the girl in red like fire. It was not that other people were not good enough, but the girl in the red dress was in the acquired 6th hurdle. She could even be equal to Feng Yuan's cultivation. As for the other 2 girls who seemed to be 17 or 18 years old, they were ordinary people. The Qinghe town is really a place of crouching tigers and hidden dragons. Since there is a 15-year-old in the acquired 6th hurdle, there must be a senior in the inborn realm. I can't be careless. This thought flashed in Su Li's mind. She said loudly, "Nice to meet you. My name is Su Li. You must have heard of me. I will teach you embroidery from now on. Today, in the first class, I am not going to teach you anything, but to do a small test to test all of your embroidery level. Now, tell me your name. It is better if you can introduce yourself briefly." Su Li's words were simple and straightforward. A touch of appreciation flashed through the eyes of the girl in red. She said proudly, "Su Li, I heard that you are not from a good family, but I like your character very much. I will tell you that my name is Yin Hongxiu, and I live in the satrap's mansion. Do you understand?" Yin Hongxiu said and curled her lips coldly. She looked at Su Li's reaction with a little sarcasm. How could such a silly girl be her teacher? The old woman was probably so confused that she couldn't think straight anymore. However, at this moment, an extremely cold and indifferent voice sounded. "Yin Hongxiu?" Su Li didn't seem to hear the latter half of the sentence and said lightly, "Pay attention to your tone in the future and respect your teacher in class. Since you are sitting here, you should scrupulously abide by etiquette. Okay, next." Yin Hongxiu was dumbfounded. She guessed that Su Li would probably pretend to be calm and praise her. Or she would forget herself and cover up her panic in a hurry. But she didn't expect that Su Li's reaction would be so ruthless. Yes, it was heartless. It seemed that Su Li didn't hear that she was the satrap's daughter. No, she heard it, but didn't care. Seeing that Yin Hongxiu was scolded, the 2 misses from rich families were slightly surprised. They immediately dispelled their thoughts and said obediently, "My name is Ran Ziden. My family is a businessman and quite rich. My name is Dong Xiaoxian. Like Miss Ran, my family is also a businessman." Gongmin saw that Yin Hongxiu was embarrassed and couldn't help but laugh in her heart. Then she said loudly, "My name is Gongmin Lecturer Su. Why don't you start the test?" Su Li heard it and shook her head slightly. She frowned and said, "Senior Gong said that there are 5 people in the special class. There are only 4 of you. Where's the other one?" Well, Ran Ziden and Dong Xiaoxian looked at each other and kept silent at the same time. Yin Hongxiu snorted coldly. Her expression clearly said that she wouldn't tell her even if she begged her. Gongmin said, "The other one is Jean Rulin. She is the pearl of the Jean family in the provincial city." She usually comes on time. I don't know why today, Jean Rulin? Suli murmured. Then she sat down and said leisurely, nothing can be accomplished without rules. My teacher is also a teacher. As long as all the students are not present in his class, he won't start the class. As a student, I naturally follow this tradition. Do you have any opinion? When the four people below the stage heard this, they were shocked. What kind of logic was this? Lecturer, you're simply dragging down the progress of our course. It is unreasonable. Yin Hongxiu immediately stood up and said angrily, did she think that she was Grandma Gong? How could she put on such airs in the first class? Yin Hongxiu, are you blaming me? Suli slightly raised her eyebrows. She tilted her head and smiled. Why do you blame me? Shouldn't the four of you blame Jean Rulin? If it weren't for her, we could have started the course long ago. Your time is the time, but mine is. You are waiting for her, but so am I. Logically, shouldn't the five of us blame Jean Rulin? Hearing Su Li's words, Yin Hongxiu was suddenly confused. Although she felt there was something strange in her words, she couldn't find any fault. Jean Rulin. Yin Hongxiu's beautiful eyes flashed with anger. She hated Jean Rulin very much in ordinary days. Jean Rulin was like a fly around her every day. She also treated Grandma Gong the same way, which was extremely disgusting. The other three people were a little older. They knew that Suli meant to divert the trouble to Jean Rulin, but they couldn't help but feel a little disgusted with Jean Rulin. In Su Li's words, Jean Rulin obviously became a person without any sense of responsibility. Huan. Yin Hongxiu couldn't help but call. Suddenly, a clear voice of a little girl came from outside the door. Miss, I am here. Go and call Jean Rulin. I want to see how arrogant she is. Even if I invite her, she won't come. Huan was shocked when she heard Yin Hongxiu was angry. She immediately obeyed and left. After an hour, a beautiful figure with a fragrant wind appeared in front of the door of the warm pavilion. It was quiet in the school, and the atmosphere was very dignified. Jean Rulin coughed and walked in with small steps. She sat next to Yin Hongxiu and said with kindness and expectation, Sister Hongxiu, why do you call me here? Jean Rulin was still surprised. She didn't expect that Yin Hongxiu would suddenly come to her. Was the relationship between her and Yin Hongxiu going further? This girl had always ignored her in the past. Who is your sister? Yin Hongxiu was annoyed when she heard Jean Rulin's address. She said, do you know that there's a class today? Why don't you come? Jean Rulin's smile on her face was slightly stiff. She soon recovered and said, didn't you say that the lecturer was changed? She is still a little girl. I happened to have an important elder to receive at home, so I didn't come. But when I saw Huan, I immediately rushed over. Jean Rulin's words were full of disdain. It seemed that she didn't see Su Li sitting at the teacher's desk and chatted with Yin Hongxiu as if nothing had happened. Yin Hongxiu instantly laughed out of anger and didn't know how to explain. But at this time, Su Li said, you mean that you don't want to come as long as it is my class? Is that right, Jean Rulin? Jean Rulin stopped smiling and recovered the calm look of a lady from a respectable family. She turned around and said with a smile, oh, I'm so sorry. Rulin, I didn't see Lecturer Su here. I didn't mean that just now. But an important elder suddenly came to visit at home. So you mean? Su Li said evilly. The special course of the Qinghe Girls' School is not as important as your elder? Jean Rulin's face was slightly pale. She waved her hand repeatedly and said, I didn't mean that. And what do you mean, huh? Do you look down on the lecturer of the Qinghe Girls' School? Su Li suddenly raised her tone, and the pressure was greatly increased. Jean Rulin was so scared that she turned pale and almost cried. I was wrong, Lecturer Su. I spoke rudely just now. Please punish me, lecturer. Jean Rulin knelt down and apologized again and again. She had wanted to take advantage of Su Li verbally, but she didn't expect that she was defeated by Su Li in a second. She didn't even know why she was afraid and why she lost. The other four people were also shocked. Jean Rulin was the pearl of the Jean family. How could she be scared by Su Li's words? Yin Hongxiu was at a loss. It seemed that she didn't understand why Jean Rulin, who was arrogant just now, suddenly became like this. In this case, Since it's your first offense, I won't pursue it anymore. Go back to your seat and start the test. Suli waved her sleeves. Jean Rulin immediately felt that she was pardoned. She sat back to her seat obediently, but her hand was slightly trembling. Suli noticed this detail and slightly raised the corner of her mouth. The Jean family, it was really a long time. The first test is to test the basic needlework. You're limited to embroider an osmanthus flower with basic needlework in half an hour. Suli said lightly, I will also join you. Let's get started. The 5 people slightly stared at the words. They didn't dare to delay and immediately began to embroider. This test was still a little difficult for them, but if they could perform exceptionally, they should be able to complete it. But they didn't know how long it would take Suli. The whole warm room became quiet. Only the action of threading the needle was repeated. Even the sound of opening the needle box became a little harsh. Gong Min was embroidering the 3rd petal attentively. Suddenly, a white and tender hand appeared in her eyes and gently held her hand. Try to change the angle of half an inch and embroider from here. Suli's voice slowly came into her ears. Gong Min was a little calm and immediately carried out Su Li's order without hesitation. She was the only student who had seen Su Li's embroidery. Naturally, she knew that Su Li's embroidery skills were even better than her grandmother's. After changing the angle, Gong Min found that her arm was much more comfortable, and the petals seemed to become more flexible, not as rigid as before. Suli. Oh no, Lecturer Su is really talented and knowledgeable. Gong Min secretly praised. Suddenly, she realized that Suli appeared beside her at this time. Did it mean? She couldn't help but look up. Sure enough, she saw that the embroidery board on the teacher's desk had been erected. There seemed to be an osmanthus flower just picked from the tree on it. Let's not talk about Gong Min's reaction. At this moment, Suli walked to Yin Hongxiu. When she saw what Yin Hongxiu was embroidering, she suddenly looked strange. What was this? Osmanthus flower? She looked like a ball of tofu dregs. Why is the needle so fragile? It's almost broken. It's so troublesome, Yin Hongxiu whispered with a bitter face. Suddenly, she noticed that there was a sound of breathing beside her. She immediately looked up and saw a pair of eyes full of indescribable feelings. Yin Hongxiu's little face immediately turned red. You are not allowed to see it. Yin Hongxiu hurriedly covered the embroidery board and said, Aren't you embroidering with us? What are you doing here? Do you want to learn secretly? Chapter 84. Yin Hongxiu smiled when she saw the flower on the embroidery board on the teacher's desk. She immediately came over and buckled the embroidery board. She immediately stood up and ran to the embroidery board. She said complacently in her heart, You still want to lie to me. It is obviously a real flower. Now the osmanthus is in full bloom. She strode forward and stretched out her hand over the surface of the embroidery board. But she grasped nothing. No. Yin Hongxiu was stunned. She didn't believe it and rubbed the surface of the embroidery board. She felt a slight bulge. The osmanthus was embroidered. It's the same as the real one. Yin Hongxiu cried out involuntarily. She turned around and saw Suli was looking at her embroidery board. She was immediately annoyed. She turned back and grabbed the embroidery board with one hand. She said with a crying tone, You are not allowed to look at it. Suli still looked calm and didn't show any weakness. She came closer and whispered, What? You can't stand being surpassed by your peers and feel defeated? You thought you were the best in the world. Even if you were not the best, you would be said to be the best. Are you satisfied with this? Suli's words were like a cold knife stabbing into her chest. Yin Hongxiu's eyes were slightly red. She was so angry that her whole body was trembling slightly. Suli was too much. What? You can't accept the fact that I told you the truth? Suli smiled and said softly, There is no perfect person in this world. Everyone will fail. If you can't stand failure, then you don't need to live. Yin Hongxiu looked at Suli in a daze, as if the world in front of her was broken by Suli. She held back the tears in her eyes and snorted. Suli, don't think that you are great because you know a little embroidery. I will be a female general in the future. Embroidery is nothing to me. Suli smiled more and said, You can't even do embroidery well. How can you be a female general? Do you think you can be arrogant because you have a little talent in martial arts? What some people say is what you like to hear, but it is poison. You're about to be poisoned, but you feel good about yourself. You're really hopeless. Yin Hongxiu was speechless. She found that she was no match for Su Li in eloquence. She felt more frustrated. At this time, Su Li came over and pointed at Yin Hongxiu's heart. When you can practice here well, no matter what you can do better than now. This sentence was different from the previous sarcasm. It was like a breeze blowing through Yin Hongxiu's heart. She vaguely remembered that her father had said similar words, but she was still young at that time and didn't understand what it meant. Today, stimulated by Su Li, she seemed to understand a little bit. This lecturer. Lecturer Su. Yin Hongxiu snorted and sat down again. She took her embroidery board and looked at it. Finally, she plucked up her courage and put it on the table. I won't run away anymore. Yin Hongxiu's eyes were full of fighting spirit, as if she had changed into another person. Before long, the incense burner burned out. Half an hour had passed. Su Li clapped her hands and motioned everyone to stop. Gong Min stopped, and a trace of pity flashed in her eyes. She didn't embroider the last branch. However, with Su Li's guidance, she had a lot of inspiration in embroidering flowers with basic needlework today. It was enough for her embroidery skills to make a small step forward. Ran Zidin and Dong Xiaoxian didn't finish embroidering either. They still needed half a branch and 2 leaves. Compared with Gong Min, their embroidery skills were still a little worse. Jean Rulin put down the needle and thread at the same time, but her eyes were full of confidence. She was the first to present the embroidery board. She was the only one who finished embroidery. I didn't expect that even Gong Min didn't finish embroidery. Does it mean that my embroidery skills have surpassed hers, and I have become the first in the class? Jean Rulin was complacent. She looked up and saw a pair of cold eyes. You finished embroidery. Do you think you were very good? Su Li's words were like cold water poured over her head. Jean Rulin suddenly woke up and shook her head quickly. Then she saw the embroidery on the embroidery board. Really, she couldn't help but grab it, but just like Yin Hongxiu, she grabbed nothing. It is embroidery. Jean Rulin was so shocked that she couldn't compare with Su Li anymore. The gap was too big. At this time, the other 4 people also presented the embroidery boards in turn and waited for Su Li's comments. Su Li picked up Ran Zidin's embroidery board first. She glanced at it and said, the basic skills are solid, but the stitches are still superficial. You need to carve the details well. The speed is not up to the standard of the top embroidery artificer, and the pattern is too rigid. It lacks authenticity. It's better to enjoy flowers in your spare time. Every word of Su Li hit the nail on the head. Ran Zidin was ashamed and couldn't help but have the true reverence for Su Li that only a teacher and a student had. Then it was Dong Xiaoxuan's turn. She naturally made a sharp comment. The third one was Yin Hongxiu's turn. She plucked up her courage and stood in front of Su Li. She was ready to be scolded, but Su Li just glanced at her lightly and said, there is still room for improvement in embroidery skills. After class, take Gong Min's embroidery board back to practice. Yin Hongxiu waited for a long time, but she was stunned when she saw Su Li pick up Gong Min's embroidery board. That was it. Didn't she scold others? Yin Hongxiu stood aside with her embroidery board. She was still confused. Since she came to the special class, it was the first time for her to be so excited. Seeing Gong Min's embroidery board, Su Li finally smiled and said, very good. You are developing in the ideal direction. I have pointed out a direction for you. If you can use it to reach a higher realm, it will be the best. Gong Min took a deep breath and couldn't help but say excitedly, thank you, lecturer. I have been stuck for a long time. Grandma can't help it. I must tell her the good news later. Su Li smiled and nodded. Gong Min didn't take the embroidery board and stood aside. Jean Rulin took a deep breath. Finally, it was her turn. Gong Min didn't finish the embroidery, but she was praised. If she finished, then... At this time, the 5 people didn't notice. They didn't know when they began to care about Su Li's comments. In just one class, the relationship between Su Li and the 5 people completed an amazing change from peers to teachers and students. Su Li slowly picked up Jean Rulin's embroidery board and said, the speed is good, and the stitches are smooth. It means a top embroidery artificer. Hearing this, Jean Rulin was happy. But Su Li's voice suddenly became cold. However, you only focus on showing off your skills and completely ignore the essence of embroidery. Let me ask you, what is the highest realm that an embroidery artificer should pursue? Jean Rulin was shocked and replied without thinking. Of course, it is the top embroidery method like the workshop owner. Advanced embroidery method. I heard that the lecturer knows how to use flower needle. Why don't you teach us? Oh, Su Li sneered and said, do you think the most important thing for an embroidery artificer is the status? Do you want to be an embroidery artificer just for fame and fortune? Of course not. Jean Rulin's face was livid. At this moment, she had recovered from the shock. Although she didn't understand why she was so scared just now, it didn't prevent her from refuting confidently. The embroidery method of the workshop owner is naturally the best, and it is also what every embroidery artificer pursues. What's wrong with what I said? What if I ask you to put aside the embroidery workshop? Su Li said lightly. What else can you say? Jean Rulin was dumbfounded. In addition to the skills and embroidery workshop that she had mastered, what else could she say? These two ways were blocked by Su Li. It seems that you don't have the potential to be a top embroidery artificer for the time being. Su Li was full of disappointment and shook her head slightly. That's all for today's class. You can go now. Wait. Jean Rulin's eyes were full of anger, and her expression was slightly distorted. She sneered and said, You are not the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop. How can you say that I am not a top embroidery artificer? Let me tell you, I have already received the examination application of the embroidery workshop. When a workshop owner goes to the embroidery workshop tomorrow, I can immediately get the embroidery method of the top embroidery artificer. I want to see what you will say about me in the next class. Then, Jean Rulin left angrily, leaving the other 4 people with different expressions. Su Li sat at the teaching desk and propped up half of her cheek. After a while, she suddenly asked, Gong Min, don't other people know about your grandma's things? Gong Min couldn't hold it anymore and couldn't help laughing. Yes. Except for Grandma. Only Sister Qingru and I know it. Well, no wonder. Su Li's meaningful words made Yin Hongxiu's heart itch. She couldn't help but pull Gong Min's sleeve and asked in a low voice, No wonder what? Gong Min glanced at Su Li. Seeing that Su Li didn't stop her, she immediately smiled and said, Grandma also gave the position of the workshop owner to lecturer Su, so Jean Rulin. Yin Hongxiu was shocked. She immediately thought of what Jean Rulin said before and couldn't help giggling. Ran Ziden and Dong Xiaoxian also looked strange. They thought that Jean Rulin seemed to be too unlucky. After the 4 people left, Su Li stared at the empty school for a while. Then, she got on Xiaowu's carriage and went to Ning Yunji's yard. Ning Yunji saw that Su Li came here without changing her clothes. He felt comforted. Although Su Li was young now, she had a respected status. But her attitude towards these old guys didn't change at all. This time, Su Li and Ning Yunji tacitly didn't mention the name of Qi Xianqing. They chatted casually, and time passed quickly. The pot of tea brewed by Ning Qing was also drunk. Aunt Ning's tea is really delicious. It's late. Su Li will come to visit next time. After saying goodbye, Su Li left lightly. Ning Qing was full of warmth. She couldn't help but say, This girl is too sweet. I feel embarrassed because of her praise. Alas, if Su Li is my daughter, how nice it would be. Ning Yunji couldn't help but snort and said, Why did you refuse the marriage that year? Ning Yunji felt something was wrong, but he saw that Ning Qing's face was full of frost. She turned around and left without saying anything. My teapot is empty. Qing, seeing that his daughter walked away without looking back, Ning Yunji couldn't help but slap himself. Why can't I control my mouth? When Su Li returned to her courtyard, it was already dark. Miss, are you going out tonight? After the last incident, Mammy Li had known a lot of Su Li's secrets. Su Li nodded slightly and said, If someone asks, just say that I'm going to the town to observe the embroidery workshop. I will. Don't worry, Mrs. Sippy. After saying goodbye to Mammy Li, Su Li changed into casual clothes and left the school gate. She went all the way to the embroidery workshop in the Qinghe town and booked a room in an inn. Then she jumped out of the back window of the room and disappeared into the night. At this moment, beside the rather lively street, a half-story building was being built in full swing. The materials used were the best in the restaurant. This scene had been maintained for a whole 7 days, causing many passers-by to talk about it. Su Huanli was one of them. I didn't expect that it was really demolished and rebuilt. Su Huanli was distressed. Although the Baiwei building didn't collapse with these two shops, he still felt that he suffered a great loss. If Su Li gained a firm foothold in the Qinghe town and used this shop to open a branch of the Baiwei building, how good it would be. Unfortunately, the other 3 shops were compensated to the Yang clan. The Su clan didn't even have a piece of land in Qinghe town. Chapter 85. In the spacious and bright adytum under the restaurant, Fang Yuan and Chu Qingning were discussing the drawings in a low voice. Suddenly, Fang Yuan's ears moved slightly. The next moment, he flashed to the door of the adytum with vigilance. When Chu Qingning was about to take action, the door of the adytum was still pushed open slowly. Su Li, who wore a black knight's suit, walked in calmly. When she saw Fang Yuan at the door, she stopped as if she was a little frightened. Seeing Su Li, Fang Yuan was slightly relieved and said, "Why didn't you tell me that you came here? How'd you come down? Don't forget who drew the drawings." Su Li chuckled and sat at the table. She asked, "How is your progress these days?" Chu Qingning smiled and came over. "Su Li, we are not lazy. You see, the adytum on the first underground floor has been built. Even the first floor has been built half. It has only been 7 days. Isn't it good?" Su Li nodded slightly and said, "I was also surprised when I came here. I didn't expect that the first underground floor had been built. In this case, you can start to transport the things of the yard here. By the way, how many taels of silver do you have?" Chu Qingning felt aggrieved and said, "Su Li, you said that you should build the restaurant as soon as possible. So, I discussed with Fang Yuan and recruited double helpers. Naturally, the expenses are high. It costs us 50,000 taels of silver to build the first floor. Don't worry, I will leave the remaining 200,000 taels of silver to you. Open the restaurant as soon as possible, so that our silver won't be like water without a source." Su Li took out the rest of the bank notes without blinking her eyes. Chu Qingning put them away and couldn't help but be shocked. Su Li was really bold. Wasn't she afraid that the business would fail? "Have you thought about the name of the restaurant?" Fang Yuan, who had been listening quietly, suddenly asked. The restaurant was about to be built with Su Li's money. Naturally, Su Li should name it. "I have thought about it for a long time. The name of the restaurant is Leanly Building." Su Li smiled and said. A ray of light flashed in her eyes. Fang Yuan was slightly stunned and nodded without saying anything. "Leanly? Lingli?" The atmosphere suddenly became a little dull. Seeing this, Chu Qingning immediately changed the topic and said, "By the way, what about those craftsmen? Since you've built an underground chamber, you naturally can't let anyone know about it. However, those craftsmen have all seen the blueprints. Isn't this a waste of effort?" Su Li smiled and took out a white porcelain bottle and put it on the stone table. "When the time comes, feed it to all the craftsmen, no matter what." Fang Yuan's face darkened slightly, and Chu Qingning's face changed immediately. He pointed to the bottle on the table and said, This is not appropriate, right? Those people." Su Li smiled sweetly. She opened the bottle and shook it. "What do you think this is? Poison to the intestines? If I really poisoned all of them to death, would I still need to open the shop?" Chu Qingning was stunned. He scratched his head in embarrassment and said, "I was wrong. What's inside? Make them forget something. The more they eat, the more they forget. You have to pay attention to the dosage when you put it in. It's best to control the memory within 2 months. Do you know?" Su Li warned him carefully. Chu Qingning couldn't help but marvel in his heart. Why did Su Li have all kinds of strange things? Even Nanjiang country, which was famous for its strange poisonous insects, was not as interesting as Su Li's poison. Where did she learn the poison skill? "Fang Yuan, can you recognize it?" After Su Li left, Chu Qingning couldn't help but ask. Fang Yuan shook his head and said, If it's a well-known poison skill, how can there be so many magical recipes? Since Su Li doesn't say it, we can't ask. Chu Qingning rubbed his chin and immediately smiled. It's so interesting to follow Su Li. Fong Yuan glanced at him expressionlessly. Then he looked at Fong Ling, who was busy in the chamber, and his eyes softened. Back in the inn, Su Li carefully checked the traces of the house to make sure that no one had been here. Then she sat down at ease and began the day's practice. Although she didn't have the assistance of elixirs, her physique was extremely suitable for the Ghost Valley meditation direction. She had quietly practiced the Ghost Valley meditation direction to the 7th hurdle. Her practice speed was more than twice as fast as that of the 5th hurdle. From the Desu town to the Qinghai province, there were many troubles, but her cultivation was steadily improving. She had stepped into the peak of the inborn 1st hurdle and was only a step away from the inborn 2nd hurdle. Su Li didn't expect such a speed. The practice method and personal experience of this life were much better than that of the previous life. She didn't know how far she could go with the complete Ghost Valley meditation direction. Nothing happened that night. The next morning, Su Li got up early and went downstairs to have breakfast. Then she walked to the embroidery workshop that had just opened. There were countless people who came to the embroidery order every day. The door was open and no one was refused. Su Li didn't show anyone her identity and easily got in. At the moment when Su Li disappeared in the door of the embroidery workshop, Yin Hongxiu and the maid Huan also appeared in front of the door with their faces tightly covered. "Miss, what did you run out? Don't you have a literature class today?" Yin Hongxiu was peeping at the door. When she heard Huan's words, she immediately said impatiently, "Oh, I saw old Ning had dark circles under his eyes, so I gave him some medicine and let him have a good sleep. Don't say anything. Hurry up and go in. I'm waiting to see a good show." Yin Hongxiu's dress was really a little conspicuous. As long as people looked carefully, they could still recognize Yin Hongxiu. The guard of the embroidery workshop held back his laughter and blushed. He pretended not to see Yin Hongxiu and let her go in. When Su Li walked into the hall of the embroidery workshop, she was immediately overwhelmed by the hustle and bustle. As far as she could see, there were businessmen holding bank notes and orders. They crowded in front of the table for accepting embroidery orders and rushed forward desperately. Ordinary embroidery was not valuable, but the fine embroidery produced by the embroidery workshop or the work embroidered by the top embroidery artificer was not only popular in the country, but also sold at a high price if it could be transported to other countries. Therefore, the business of the embroidery workshop was full every day. The situation in the hall would continue from morning to evening. Su Li glanced at it and no longer paid attention to it. She turned around and stopped the supervisor. She showed the nameplate of the top embroidery artificer. The supervisor's expression immediately changed slightly. He took Su Li to the back hall. When they entered the back hall of the embroidery workshop, the hustle and bustle became smaller and smaller. When the supervisor took her to the embroidery room, the hustle and bustle had completely disappeared and was replaced by silence. "Lady, I'm not familiar with you. I don't know which embroidery artificer you are. Could you tell me? I can lead the way." The supervisor who took Su Li here was middle-aged. He thought Su Li was too young, but he didn't dare to cross the line. The nameplate of the top embroidery artificer couldn't be faked. Even if she took the nameplate of her parents, he wouldn't stop her. The top embroidery artificer was highly respected in the embroidery workshop. As a small official, he couldn't offend her. "I don't know where my embroidery room is," Su Li said. The supervisor thought she was right and said, "In this case, miss, why don't you go to the central hall and wait for your elders? It is the reception hall of the workshop owner. It happens that the new workshop owner will come to inspect today. If you are lucky, you can meet her." Su Li slightly raised her eyebrows and didn't expose him. She said, "Let's go to the central hall." The supervisor was relieved when he heard that. If the miss was unreasonable, it would be difficult for him to deal with her. Walking from the back hall to the central hall, Su Li and the supervisor met many embroidery artificers who passed by hurriedly with embroidery boards in their arms. Many of them pointed at Su Li. Obviously, they were curious. Su Li remained calm. The supervisor was amazed by her calm temperament at such a young age. At the same time, he was more and more curious about which descendant of the top embroidery artificer she was. The name of the embroidery artificer was on the back of the nameplate. He just saw the surface of the nameplate and didn't dare to let Su Li turn it over for him. "Miss, we have arrived at the central hall." The supervisor stopped and pointed to an open room in the backyard. Su Li looked over and immediately saw many acquaintances. She slightly raised the corner of her mouth and stepped into the room before the supervisor continued to lead the way. When the supervisor saw the people in the room, his face changed immediately. He knew something was wrong, but when he thought of Su Li's identity, he braced himself and followed her in. Jean Rulin was trying to get close to Yin Hongxiu, who was depressed. Suddenly, she heard footsteps. She turned around and saw the person. Her face changed immediately. She said, "Why are you here? Who allowed you to come in?" Then, a sharp light flashed in her eyes, and her sight fell on the steward behind Su Li. Her exasperated voice instantly broke through the roof of the central hall. "Gao Dehai, how dare you? She is not a member of the embroidery workshop. How dare you bring an outsider in?" Gao Dehai panicked when he heard that. He knew Jean Rulin. She was the daughter of the Jean family. She was unruly and temperamental. If he fell into the hands of this woman, he would definitely end miserably. I got. Dehai didn't say anything. Su Li gently stepped forward and said with a smile, "Jean Rulin, I haven't seen you for a day. Your arrogance has skyrocketed. It seems like you don't take my words to heart at all." Jean Rulin sneered and said, "Su Li, where do you think this is? This is not your warm room, but the embroidery workshop of the Qinghe province. You break in so openly. Be careful that you will be arrested by the government and be punished." Before Jean Rulin finished her words, Yin Hongxiu laughed behind her and said, "Jean Rulin, you are really arrogant. I'm not a member of the embroidery workshop. Why don't you punish me?" Jean Rulin's expression froze. She turned around and saw Yin Hongxiu with a dangerous smile. She immediately recovered her friendly expression and said, "Miss Hongxiu, in the Qinghe town, no one dares to arrest you and put you in jail. Su Li is just a commoner. How can she compare with you?" Then, Jean Rulin turned around and her face instantly became fierce. She said, "Gao Dehai, what are you doing? Go and report it to the government." Gao Dehai was stunned. Looking at Su Li's delicate and innocent appearance, he hesitated for a long time and didn't move. Seeing his reaction, Jean Rulin was about to go crazy instantly and said, "Guards, you're a group of cowards. Don't you dare to arrest a commoner who breaks into the embroidery workshop." As soon as she finished her words, a lot of observant stewards rushed out and were about to catch Su Li. Yin Hongxiu saw that the situation was not good. She immediately stood up and shouted, "Stop!" The title of the satrap's daughter was naturally more important than that of Jean Rulin. The stewards immediately stopped and stood aside. Jean Rulin was stunned. She couldn't figure out why Yin Hongxiu stopped them. She hated Su Li to ride roughshod over her. At this time, Su Li finally moved. She stepped out and gradually approached Jean Rulin. She opened her red lips. "Jean Rulin, you keep saying report to the government and punish. Does this embroidery workshop belong to you? You overstep your authority. Aren't you afraid that the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop will complain?" Jean Rulin immediately laughed and said sarcastically, "Who do you think you are? Can a workshop owner speak for you? Besides, I'm also thinking for the embroidery workshop. Even if the workshop owner knows it, she will praise me for doing a good job. No, no, no. If the workshop owner knows it, she will definitely not say so." Chapter 86. Jean Rulin looked at Su Li, who was sitting in the position of workshop owner. She stammered for a long time and then burst into laughter. "Su Li, Lecturer Gong gave the position of special class teacher to you. It was the worst decision she made in her life. It seems that you have been fascinated by the sudden fame. You even dared to be the workshop owner? Do you think that you are the workshop owner?" Su Li ignored the stunned stewards and knocked on the table with her slender fingers. She said slowly, "Unfortunately, I just took over the position of workshop owner. You are the embroidery artificer of the embroidery workshop. Don't you know who the former workshop owner is? Quack. Hearing that, Jean Rulin suddenly stopped laughing like a strangled duck. She really didn't know who the former workshop owner was. Although she was a senior embroidery artificer in the embroidery workshop, she had never embroidered a piece of cloth here. Every time the workshop owner came, she was not there. Other embroidery artificers didn't have a deep relationship with her, and they didn't mention the name of the workshop owner. How could she know? Gao Dahai, go and call the chief steward of the embroidery workshop. Suli ignored Jean Rulin, who was standing aside, and ordered. Gao Dahai trembled slightly and hurried out of the central hall without saying anything. After less than 5 minutes, Suli saw a white-haired old man hurrying in. When he saw Suli, he immediately saluted without hesitation and said, "I am Jia, and the chief steward of the embroidery workshop. It's my pleasure to meet the new workshop owner. Workshop owner, please forgive me for not greeting you when you come from afar." As the chief steward, John was naturally more well-informed than other stewards. He had long known that the new workshop owner was a 15-year-old girl, but her embroidery skills were better than that of old workshop owner Gao. She might even create a school of embroidery and leave a lasting legacy. John naturally tried his best to flatter such a person and hoped to leave his name in the history books. Suli hurriedly let John stand up and said, "Grandpa Jia, you don't have to be so polite. I am a junior and shouldn't be so polite. But since Senior Gong put the responsibility on me, I have to accept it." Seeing that Suli was so mature at such a young age, John was relieved and said with a smile, "Workshop owner, you are so polite. I hope you can take care of the embroidery workshop in the future." Jean Rulin, who was listening to their conversation, had already become a sculptor. Suli was the workshop owner, and she actually wanted to get someone to arrest her and send her to the authorities. It's over. Jean Rulin only felt that everything in front of her was black, and she wanted to pass out directly. "Boss, what's going on?" When Jian saw Jean Rulin and Yin Hongxiu in the central hall, he immediately felt something unusual. Speaking of which, today is the day when the gold embroidery artificer takes the assessment to become a top embroidery artificer. "Workshop owner, can you start now?" Suli shook her head slightly and said, "I am not only the workshop owner, but also the lecturer of the Qinghe Girls' School. Jean Rulin is my student. How could I not know her embroidery skills? Compared with the top embroidery artificer, she must be a little less intelligent. And today, Jean Rulin, you are impulsive. You wronged others for no reason. You are too impetuous. How can you embroider exquisite works? I will punish you to reflect on your mistakes for 3 months. If you can repent, then you can take the test again. Jean Rulin, do you have any objections?" Jean Rulin lowered her head and almost bit her lips to bleed. Finally, she suddenly relaxed and said in a low voice, "It's up to you." Suli's eyes flashed a touch of profound meaning, and she nodded slightly. She picked up the bamboo hat and veil brought by Yin Hongxiu and said to Jian, "Let's go to the embroidery room to have a look. Since I am here, I can't come in vain." Jian understood that Suli was going to instruct the embroidery artificer. There was a kind of expectation in his heart. He didn't look at Jean Rulin and left the central hall with Suli, "My bamboo hat." Yin Hongxiu stood up and watched Suli go away. She muttered with grievance. Suli really didn't regard herself as an outsider. The bamboo hat and veil were both brought by her. However, Yin Hongxiu didn't feel disgusted by Suli at all. She also felt surprised. If it were others, she would definitely scold them. Could it be that she would only lose her temper to those who were worse than her? Couldn't she scold those who were better than her? That's not right. The third brother is much better than me, but he is scolded by me every day. Yin Hongxiu couldn't figure it out. She couldn't help but knock her head. Then she stomped her feet and left. Since there was no fun to watch, she would go back to the mansion to continue to practice the bow. In the blink of an eye, there was only Jean Rulin in the central hall. Looking at the empty room, Jean Rulin took out the nameplate of Senior Embroidery Artificer. She stared at it for a moment and suddenly pinched it hard. Her knuckles turned white. "Suli, I won't let it go. A commoner wants to be the workshop owner? It's so funny. Ho ho." Jean Rulin laughed in a low voice. Her laughter became louder and louder, and then she became crazy. The humiliation she suffered in Su Li's hands in the past 2 days was more than 10 years of her life. If she didn't take revenge, she wouldn't be the pearl of the Jean family. In the embroidery workshop, the embroidery skill was the best pass. Su Li covered her face and instructed the top embroidery artificers with Jian. Then she went to other embroidery rooms. In just one afternoon, all the embroidery artificers had accepted the identity of the new workshop owner. Although they knew that Su Li was young from her figure, no one dared to gossip in front of Su Li's embroidery skill. That night, Su Li went back to the school. Everything seemed very calm. However, the news that a commoner girl with no background became the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop had been known by all the big families through various channels. For a time, the undercurrent was turbulent. No one knew what would happen when Su Li came to the embroidery workshop. When Su Li returned to the school, she saw Mei Ruhan standing in front of the gate. She didn't know who she was waiting for. Mei Ruhan's eyes lit up when she saw Su Li. She ran to Su Li quickly and said, "Li, you finally come back. I have been waiting for you here after class. I didn't expect that you really came back." Su Li hadn't seen Mei Ruhan for a long time. She also felt very close to her. She smiled and said, "What are you waiting for me for? Where's Gua?" "Gua." Mei Ruhan hesitated for a long time and finally confessed. In order to lighten my burden, she went to do odd jobs outside the school. Su Li slightly raised her eyebrows and said, "Don't you have enough money?" As far as she knew, the Mei family was also a big family. They shouldn't limit Mei Ruhan's expenses in the Qinghe girls' school. It should be enough. Mei Ruhan blushed. She shook Su Li's arm and said coquettishly, "Oh, don't ask so much. Can you find an odd job for me?" Su Li couldn't help laughing. Mei Ruhan might have done something impulsively, which led to the current predicament. But she was embarrassed to tell her. However, the Linli building happened to need a helper. She had already appreciated Mei Ruhan's cleverness in the Muyang girls' school. Since the opportunity was ready-made, there was no reason for Su Li not to use it. After thinking about it, Su Li nodded and said with a smile, "I know a place that is suitable for you." "Really? Where is it?" Mei Ruhan was happy. She wanted to have a try with Su Li. She didn't know anyone else in the Qinghe town. It was not suitable for her to find Ningqing. Although Su Li was now a special class lecturer, she was too young. Mei Ruhan still thought it was easier to find Su Li for help. "It is a winery, but it is not an ordinary winery." Su Li smiled sweetly and said, "It's not enough to just study. Since you want to be an extraordinary woman with unparalleled wisdom, of course, you have to get in touch with the ways of the world and even the deceitful Jianghu. Are you willing to go?" An extraordinary woman with unparalleled wisdom. Mei Ruhan's eyes brightened. She nodded and said, "If there is such an experience field, Ruhan is willing to have a try. Even if I die, I won't regret it." Su Li's tone suddenly became cold, and her expression was serious. Mei Ruhan was startled. Her face was slightly pale, but there was a heat that was different from fear in her eyes. "Even if I die, I won't regret it." Hearing Mei Ruhan's childish answer, Su Li smiled slightly and became gentle again. She said, "Go back and wait for the news. It will take me about a month to take you there." Mei Ruhan nodded and then said bitterly, "Li, can you lend me some silver? I will return it to you when I work in a winery and earn money." Su Li couldn't help laughing. She gave Mei Ruhan 1,000 taels of silver without asking more. After Su Li left, Mei Ruhan's heart was still beating wildly. She knew that Su Li was not a person without a target. Since Su Li said so, there must be something very important for her to participate. Mei Ruhan, who had never experienced any danger in her life, was very excited at the moment. Next, Su Li's life in the school became calm. Every day, Su Li would go to the winery early in the morning and would not come back until the building was closed in the evening. At night, Su Li meditated instead of sleeping. She practiced hard all day long. Finally, she broke through the bottleneck after half a month and broke through to the inborn second hurdle. This speed was extremely fast, but Su Li was still not satisfied. If she didn't use all the 400,000 taels of silver to build the winery, her practice speed could be increased by 3 times. However, Suli found that slow also had its advantages. She was reading widely. Although it had nothing to do with the Ghost Valley meditation direction, she could draw parallels and bring inspiration to her. Then her understanding of the Ghost Valley meditation direction went to a higher level. It was worth mentioning that she accidentally condensed the second kind of starlight with the secret method one night. This kind of starlight was not like any of the starlight mentioned by Qi Xianqing. Suli could only put it aside for the time being and wait for the opportunity to understand it later. Qi Xianqing said that the potential of the wood starlight was not enough to reach a higher realm, let alone compared with other killing stars. Suli condensed a soybean-sized green starlight at the fingertips of her right hand. However, I refined poison for many years in my previous life. What can be used as medicine and poison? In my hands, it can not only become a thing to save people, but also a weapon to kill people. And this... Su Li's left fingertips shook slightly, and a faint fluorescence appeared. If Su Li's eyesight had not been greatly improved after she reached the inborn hurdle, she could not see clearly who was inside. The shape inside is constantly changing, like a knife, a sword, and all kinds of weapons in the world. This kind of starlight, what is it? Su Li was puzzled. Moreover, she still remembered that Qi Xianqing said that a person would only comprehend one kind of starlight in his life. Why did she have two? Was it because of her rebirth? Then, Su Li denied this speculation. The Ghost Valley meditation direction she practiced in her previous life was a complete mess. There was no secret method to cooperate with it, let alone the horrifying star power above the inborn hurdle. It seems that the change brought by the second half of the Ghost Valley meditation direction. If so, this practice method is more precious than I thought. Su Li's eyes flashed with contemplation. The realm above the inborn hurdle was simply a legend in the martial arts circle. No one even saw what the existence above the inborn hurdle would be. It could be said that no one in the entire Dahan country knew it better than her. She reached the peak of the inborn hurdle in her previous life, but she was stuck at that step. No matter how hard she struggled, she could not break through. Finally, she made up her mind to enter that kind of impasse. It was almost suicidal, but also made her see higher and farther. If she practiced to the peak of the inborn hurdle in this life, and then stimulated by the star power. Su Li was slightly shocked. At this moment, she thought of many things, but soon she gave up all the ideas. Chapter 87. As Su Li continued to study her practice, time passed quietly. In the blink of an eye, a month had passed. Qinghe Prefecture was decorated with lanterns and streamers. The spring festival was coming. In the courtyard of the school, Su Li sat in front of the window and quietly watched the snow falling outside. During the spring festival this year, her eldest brother, Su Qingtan, was meditating in the National Academy and had no time to go back. She didn't need to go back either. She just used the excuse of going back to the Qinghe school. When Su Huanli heard that it was the Qinghe school, he agreed immediately. He also told her to inquire about whether there were any cheaper shops in the Qinghe town. At this moment, Mammy Li came from behind and said, "Miss, young Master Fong sent a message saying that the winery has been built." Su Li nodded. "Let's go there. There is no one in the school. It's not appropriate for me to stay here." Mammy Li took her luggage and followed Su Li to the gate of the school. When the guard at the gate saw Su Li, he immediately smiled and said, "Lecturer Su, are you going back for the new year?" "Yes." Su Li smiled sweetly and said, "It's really hard for you to protect the school." "Ha, not at all. Not at all." Hearing Lecturer Su's words, "I feel warm all over. Have a safe trip, Lecturer Su." The guard said goodbye warmly, not for anything else, but because Su Li often went out in the past month, and every time she passed by, she would bring some delicious food for them. No lecturer in the school could do that. They were also human beings. Receiving such meticulous kindness, they were naturally moved and regarded Su Li as a close person. No matter who came to ask about Su Li's whereabouts, they would help to cover up in order to protect Su Li, which saved Su Li a lot of trouble. Walking on the street, Su Li put on a cloak and a hat. Mammy Li also put on her bamboo hat. In this world of ice and snow, the passers-by were hurrying, and no one would take a good look at their faces. On a second-class street in Qinghe City, a three-story building stood out like a crane in a flock of chickens. It stood among a group of low-rise shops and was particularly eye-catching. The paint of the tall building was extremely bright, and its entire body was dark red. It was also made of this year's new wood. Just looking at it made him want to go in and take a seat. Even if it was just a cup of tea, it would be very comfortable. Why doesn't the Leanly building open? I like to go in and see what's going on here. I'm sick of the food in the city. I really hope this is a restaurant. Could it be a place for bathing? Hee hee. I see that this building is elegant and unique. It's definitely not what you were thinking. In the past 2 days, I've seen many manservants busying themselves with decorations. I believe that once they're done, it'll be time to open the door. Since I still have some red packet money on me during the new year, I'll go in and enjoy myself. Many people were looking forward to it. Some people estimated that the building would cost at least 200,000 taels of silver. This price did not include the land. It was much higher than the construction cost of a normal restaurant. At this moment, Fong Ling rubbed her small hands and stood outside the back door of the Leanly building. She kept looking around. Suddenly, her eyes brightened and she shouted, "They are coming." When Suli walked to the door, she heard Fong Ling calling. Then she saw Haydn and a group of people rush out and snatch the parcel from Mammy Lee's hand. They surrounded her and entered the building. Looking at the sumptuous dishes on the round table in the lobby, Suli had a strange feeling and didn't know what to feel for a while. "Sisterly, these are all my work," Fong Ling said with a red face. "Although they are not as delicious as yours, they are the New Year's Eve dinner I prepared for you." Suli touched Fong Ling's small head and said in an unprecedentedly gentle voice, "Ling is great. I'll teach you to cook more delicious food in the future." Fong Ling had never been praised by Su Li in such an exaggerated way. She said hum with tears and buried her head in Su Li's chest. Fong Yuan looked at them, and a faint smile appeared on his lips. No matter what Su Li's purpose was to build this place, it was enough for them to have a place to settle down and make them feel happy. Of course, it would be better if it wasn't called the Leanly building. Thinking of this, Fong Yuan felt a little sad in his heart. He didn't understand this feeling. He just felt a little uncomfortable. However, he never told anyone about this feeling, even to Chu Qingning. He was afraid that if he mentioned it, he would destroy everything in front of him. After the New Year's Eve dinner, Chu Qingning stretched himself comfortably and gave Fong Ling a thumbs up. The food cooked by Sister Ling is getting more and more fragrant and delicious. I don't know who will benefit from it in the future. Fong Yuan, don't you think so? Fong Yuan rolled his eyes and ignored him. Fong Ling cleaned up the bowls and chopsticks angrily and said, "Brother Qingning, eat your food. I want to be a very powerful person like Sister Su Li. No one can marry me." Haydn and others laughed. After a while of laughter, Fong Ling and Haydn went back to their rooms to rest, leaving only Su Li and others. Chu Qingning adjusted his mood and said, "Su Li, all the wines in the yard have been transported here. Those craftsmen don't remember what they built during this time. When will we open for business?" "Open for business?" Su Li pointed to the 3rd floor and shook her head with a smile. "There are only 15 of you. Can you manage the business of the 3rd floor?" Chu Qingning was dumbfounded. Yes, and it was not only the 3rd floor, but also the underground. They were too busy. Fong Yuan gently knocked on the table and asked, "Go to the broker house to buy?" "Yes." Chu Qingning clapped his hands and agreed. "Su Li, what you build is not an ordinary winery. It is obviously not appropriate to recruit workers. The only way to solve the problem now is to go to the broker house to buy people. It is easier to control the life and death of the bought people." Speaking of this, Chu Qingning suddenly narrowed his eyes and whispered, "Speaking of it, if we didn't desperately escape, Fong Yuan and I would have become commodities for people to buy and sell in the broker house. Of course, it is more likely that we will die directly. It's really annoying to think about it." Fong Yuan frowned slightly and motioned Chu Qingning not to continue to say, so as not to expose too much. Su Li suddenly smiled and said, I'm not very clear about the past of you two, but I know your hatred. If you really want to take revenge, you should plan it slowly. Fang Yuan's expression was slightly stiff, and he looked at Su Li inquiringly. Did she really know? Or was she deliberately mystifying? Su Li seemed not to see Fang Yuan's expression and decisively finalized the itinerary. Tomorrow, we will disguise ourselves and go to the broker house together. The next day, the sky was clear, but it was colder. The broker house of a Qinghe town was located in the most marginal area of the North City. After all, the slave trade was not a glorious trade, so the owner of the broker house consciously opened it in the farthest place from the satrap's mansion. Su Li and the other two walked here. They were all dressed in snow-white clothes, and their sleeves were fluttering. After taking the bone-changing elixir made by Su Li, Fang Yuan and Chu Qingning's height increased a lot. They covered their handsome faces and became ordinary, like two expressionless guards. Su Li's height also increased a few inches. She was dressed in snow-white clothes and wore a light gauze bamboo hat on her head. Her face was covered with a veil. She was very mysterious. As soon as the three people appeared at the door of the broker house, they were immediately greeted respectfully by the manager of the broker house. Just by looking at the guards' clothes, they could tell that there was only one distinguished guest. May I know your name? The boss of the broker house slightly bowed and smiled. Chu Qingning immediately snorted and said, You can call my master Mr. Li. As he said, Chu Qingning was angry in his heart. Did Su Li deliberately take advantage of him? Why did she set up such an identity? He just made up in the morning and was confused until now. On the other side, Fang Yuan tightened his mouth and his face twitched slightly. Finally, he succeeded in holding back his laughter. The boss of the broker house was also stunned. Mr. Li, the person in the middle, was obviously a woman, but he didn't care too much about it. He immediately said politely, It turns out to be Mr. Li. Please come in. May I know who do you want to meet? We have all kinds of slaves, maids, prisoners of war, and clansmen, and they have all been educated and absolutely obedient. Let's see who could be the waiter of the winery first. Su Li said softly. Her tone was strange, as if it was covered with a layer of cloth. It was hard to tell whether it was a man or a woman. The boss of the broker house was so scared that his face turned pale. He didn't dare to ask more questions and immediately took the three people into the winery. He finally understood that Mr. Li was definitely a person in Jianghu. Those were all desperate people. He didn't want to make the master unhappy and die on the spot. He was even ready to send the servants for free. Su Li naturally didn't know the thoughts of the boss of the broker house. At this moment, when they entered the house to choose servants, they immediately smelled a faint stench. The boss of the broker house was about to apologize, but he saw that neither Chu Qingning nor Fang Yuan changed their expressions at all. Even Mr. Li seemed to be accustomed to it and didn't have any reaction. Ada, you can choose some who can be trained. Su Li pointed to the cages with people in them and said softly. Fang Yuan's face darkened, but he still walked over and began to touch them one by one. Su Li said that they should choose the seedlings who could practice martial arts. What they wanted to train was not only waiters, but also the embryonic form of a force. The boss of the broker house stood aside and felt cold all over. The young man, named Ada, walked over and directly touched them one by one, regardless of the filth or hatred. Although there were people regularly cleaning there was still a lot of excrement. Generally, when people came to choose people, they let them out to sea. Mr. Li was so direct. After a while, Fang Yuan came over and shook his head. His voice was transmitted to Su Li's ears. Although there are two seedlings, their spirits have collapsed, and they are too servile. They are not worth training. The boss of the broker house saw Fang Yuan shake his head and immediately panicked. He quickly said, Mr. Li, it doesn't matter if you're not satisfied. We still have 9 such places. If not, we can go to the prisoner camp directly. I have a good relationship with the people there. That's really helpful. Su Li's voice was indifferent without any joy. She said, If I can't gather 20 people in the remaining 9 camps, I will bother you to take me to the prisoner camp in person. The boss of the broker house was in a cold sweat. He nodded repeatedly and said, Of course. It's my honor to serve you. As he said, the boss of the broker house couldn't stop the fear in his heart. He was not so timid, even when he met high-ranking officials and nobles. Why was he so scared when he met Mr. Lee, who covered his face? It was really weird. In the next 9 camps, Fong Yuan only picked out 6 that were barely acceptable. A group of skinny teenagers followed Su Li and the other 2. There were fear and imagination about the future in their eyes, but they were not numb and defeated. The boss of the broker house had been engaged in the slave trade for many years. At a glance, he could see the spirit of the 6 teenagers. He immediately understood that the servants Su Li wanted to find were not devoid of humanity. There were not many such slaves in the broker house. It seemed that they could only go to the prisoner camp. When he thought of his friendship with the prisoner camp, the boss of the broker house was bleeding in his heart. He bought them with money. There were fewer opportunities to go to the prisoner camp, but there were 3 ruthless people standing beside him. He didn't dare to say no. Taking the 6 slave teenagers, Su Li got in the car to the broker house. Soon, she went out of the Qingha town and came to the military camp stationed outside the city. Su Li glanced at it and saw that it was not only a prisoner camp, but also a training camp for the official army. Chapter 88. This is a restricted area of the military camp. No one is allowed to enter. The young man shouted coldly, and his sharp eyes swept over the boss of the broker house and the carriage behind him. Who are you? Tell me your name. When the boss of the broker house saw the face of the deputy general, he immediately looked bitter. How could he meet this little devil? He must have gone out today without looking at the almanac. He was so unlucky. Thinking of this, he had already jumped out of the carriage quickly and approached the young man to flatter. Third child, I call me Deputy General Yin. The young man looked unhappy and corrected him coldly. The boss of the broker house was stunned and immediately changed his address. Deputy General Yin, I am in charge of the broker house. The distinguished guests of the broker house are sitting in the carriage. If they're not satisfied with the ones in the broker house, I will let them come to the prisoner camp to choose. What do you think? The young man frowned when he heard the words. The prisoner camp was connected with the broker house. He also knew that it was a secret rule of the military camp, and it was not easy to stop it. However, let them all come down. After I verify their identities, you can go in. The young man pointed at the carriage. The boss of the broker house changed his face slightly and sweated on his forehead. He didn't move for a long time. The young man noticed the strangeness and immediately snorted. He walked a few steps forward to the carriage, pointed the long spear in his hand at the carriage curtain, and said in a deep voice, People in the carriage, get off. The boss of the broker house was about to cry at the back. He was afraid that the 3 people in the carriage were not happy and killed the young man directly. At that time, even he might lose his head, and the broker house would not be able to open. The next moment, the curtain of the carriage was slowly opened. Fong Yuan and Chu Qingning walked out of the carriage and stood beside it. When the young man saw the 2 of them, his eyes were slightly fixed. The pneuma of the 2 of them was indistinct, and he couldn't see through them. That was to say, the cultivation of the 2 of them was at least the same as his, the acquired 4th hurdle, or even higher. The young man was shocked and couldn't help grasping the long spear in his hand. Such an age and cultivation were enough to be promoted to deputy general in the army. But these 2 people were just servants with others? What was the identity of the person in the carriage? At this moment, Su Li came down from the carriage. The young man stared at Su Li closely, but no matter how he looked, he couldn't detect Su Li's pneuma, as if the masked woman was just an ordinary person. Was it possible for an ordinary person? The vigilance in the young man's eyes blazed, and he unconsciously restrained his tone. May I ask where this miss is from? Seeing that the young man was so scared that his face turned pale, Chu Qingning laughed secretly. He certainly did not expect that Su Li was really an ordinary person, because his and Fong Yuan's cultivation was too confusing. With the guidance of young Master Ling Li for 1 month, plus their hard practice for several months, he and Fong Yuan's cultivation had made great progress. He now stopped at the acquired 7th hurdle, while Fong Yuan went 1 step further and reached the acquired 8th hurdle. Suli didn't know what Chu Qingning was thinking. She said slowly, "You can call me Mr. Li. I heard that the third son of County Governor Yin is serving in the army. You must be the third son of the Yin family, Yin Zai, right?" Yin Zai was not surprised that his identity was exposed. Even the boss of the broker house knew his identity. This woman had an extraordinary background, so it wasn't strange for her to be well informed. However, this woman had changed her voice to conceal her true appearance. It was obvious that he didn't want to reveal his identity. What he asked before was probably in vain. As for Mr. Li, it was obviously a pseudonym. Thinking of this, he looked serious and said aloud, "Miss, forgive me for being straightforward. According to the rules of the army, if you can't take off your veil, I can't let you enter the camp. Please go back." As soon as he said that, Fang Yuan and Chu Qingning looked slightly cold. A little light flashed through Su Li's eyes, but she chuckled and said, "Child's eye, you are just worried that I will do harm to the military camp. If you don't mind the salary, you can go with us. If I really do something wrong, I believe that you can easily stop me with your position in the army, right?" Then, Suli didn't look at Yin Zai. Her eyes fell on the boss of the broker house. She said in a soft but indisputable voice, "Boss of the broker house, please lead the way." The boss of the broker house suddenly felt endless pressure and subconsciously walked to the prisoner camp. Yin Zai opened his mouth, but he couldn't say anything to stop her. He could only bite the bullet and follow her. He asked himself, if the mysterious Mr. Li really wanted to do something dangerous, did he really have the ability to stop it? A group of people passed through the military camp. When the passing sergeants saw Yin Zai and the team, they immediately let them go. Seeing this situation, Yin Zai realized that he was used by Su Li without a trace. He couldn't help but feel angry. The boss of the broker house saved a lot of money. He was slightly happy and also prayed that Su Li and others came here just to buy people. "Mr. Li, we arrived at the prisoner camp." Su Li smelled the unique, familiar smell of the prisoner camp. She smiled coldly and stepped into it. She was more familiar with this place than the boss of the broker house. The air was mixed with a foul and rotten smell. Occasionally, one or two yellow-faced and emaciated people could be seen climbing out of the tent. They were naked and blue with cold. It was almost disgusting. Fang Yuan and Chu Qingning looked slightly cold. They couldn't believe that if they couldn't escape and fell into such a hell on earth, how sober they would be. Yin Zai had vomited. His face was as pale as paper. He couldn't help but ask, "Why is the prisoner camp like this? Is there no one in the army to control it?" The boss of the broker house seemed to have been used to the smell here. His face didn't change at all. He kindly explained to Yin Zai, "Deputy General Yin, you don't know. The prisoners in the prisoner camp are hopeless for the future. You see, those who are not wearing clothes are the weak ones among the prisoners. They are weak, so they naturally become the target of the prisoners. As long as no one is killed, the military camp won't care." Yin Zai fell into silence. As a deputy general in the army, he didn't know as much about the prisoner camp as the boss of the broker house. What he saw today had a great impact on his experience. He followed Su Li all the way to the prisoner camp and didn't say a word. The four of them passed by a large purple tent. The rotten smell in their noses was stronger. Chu Qingning couldn't help but ask, "Boss, what is this place? Why is it so stinky?" The boss of the broker house cautiously glanced at Su Li, who was walking in front of him, and whispered, "This is the brothel of the army. The prisoner camp and the brothel of the army are the same. The only difference is that the brothel of the army is a little cleaner." The boss of the broker house emphasized the word cleaner, but no one could tell whether it was cleaner or dirtier. Chu Qingning's face was slightly red. Fortunately, he didn't show any flaws with the appearance-disguising pill. The boss of the broker house couldn't help but sigh in his heart. The two guards of Mr. Li were really cold-blooded. They didn't change their faces when they heard those words. The boss of the broker house thought his voice was very low, but everyone present actually heard it clearly. Yin Zai looked around and couldn't help but snort coldly. He said, "You are hopeless." Before he finished his words, he saw Su Li's footsteps stagnate, and she actually stopped. "Mr. Li, what's wrong?" The boss of the broker house hurriedly went up to ask. Su Li's eyes were very cold. She pointed to the small tent behind the two purple tents on the right side of the road and said, "Since Adjutant Yin is self-righteous, why don't you go there and have a look?" Yin's eyes expression was cold when he heard that. He didn't think that he was wrong. He said, "A group of women who abandon themselves to degeneration become prostitutes. Does Mr. Li have other ideas?" Su Li shook her head slightly and didn't answer. Yin's eyes snorted coldly. He went directly to the small tent pointed by Su Li and opened it. The next moment, he seemed to be struck by lightning. He was dull and couldn't move anymore. Behind the curtains, pairs of pure and fearful eyes looked at him. In the dim light, he could still see the rows of girls squatting inside. They were all 12 or 13 years old girls. Their bodies were covered in bruises, and their clothes were barely covering their bodies. Some of them were even naked, not wearing anything at all. "Child Yin, do you think that these children will abandon themselves to degeneration and understand the desire of human relations?" Su Li's cold voice sounded behind him. Yin's eyes slowly raised his head and glimpsed her sarcastic eyes through the veil of the bamboo hat. He was extremely ashamed. These children are the womenfolk of criminal officials. They have done nothing wrong, but they are implicated. They may not be able to leave for the rest of their lives. Abandon themselves to degeneration? If I remember correctly, Child Yin is already 18 years old this year. You are so naive and lovely. After Su Li said it lightly, she floated away. She didn't look at the girls behind the curtain. She didn't think that she was a savior. She was even the opposite. Save people? How many could she save? She was walking on the edge of the knife. How could she be qualified to save people? "Mr. Li, Child Yin doesn't seem to follow us." The boss of the broker house followed Su Li and looked back every 3 steps. They were getting farther and farther away from the brothel of the military. "Don't worry, boss of the broker house. Don't forget what the purpose of this trip is," Su Li said coldly and sealed the mouth of the boss of the broker house, who wanted to continue to ask questions. Shortly after leaving the brothel of the military, Su Li and others finally came to the center of the prisoner camp. Those who stayed here were all prisoners of war who had just entered the camp. Under the arrangement of the boss of the broker house, the officers quickly gathered the prisoners of war in the entire camp. A large group of people stood in the open space in the middle of the camp. Most of them wore exotic costumes. Pairs of eyes full of hatred, curiosity, or fear constantly glanced at Su Li and others who wore bright and beautiful clothes. In the past few months in the prisoner camp, they had learned to be obedient under the oppression of the military camp, at least on the surface. After the arrangement, the boss of the broker house returned to Su Li and whispered, "There are frequent riots in the Nanjiang country, so most of them are prisoners of war of the Nanjiang country. I heard that the Nanjiang country is very powerful in using poisonous insects. Mr. Li, you should be careful." Su Li nodded slightly and let Fang Yuan and Chu Qingning, who couldn't help but go in to pick people. After the two entered this place, their breathing became slightly rapid. It seemed that there were old friends of their Nanjiang country in this group of people. However, Su Li thought carefully and found it was not a coincidence. Fang Yuan and Chu Qingming fled to the Desa town one after another, which happened half a year ago. At this time, the prisoners of war on the battlefield were filtered layer by layer. The time when they came to the prisoner camp was almost half a year ago. The time was just right. Chu Qingming almost wanted to step into a ragged woman in the crowd, but when he saw the military camp around him, he took a slight breath and suppressed the palpitation in his heart. Then he started to pick from the first prisoner of war. At this time, he couldn't show the slightest flaw. Fang Yuan's performance was much calmer. He quickly cut in from the other side of Chu Qingming and began to pick. Soon, there were only more than 50 people left in the team of more than 200 prisoners of war. The prisoners who failed to be selected left disappointed. It was not easy for them to meet a master who seemed to have a strong background, but he didn't even pass the first round of screening. At this time, Yanzai had also come out of the brothel of the military camp and followed a group of girls. Su Li looked at Yanzai with a smile and immediately motioned Fang Yuan and Chu Qingming to continue to screen. What she wanted were not only fools who could only practice martial arts without brains. Fang Yuan took a simple booklet and picked out more than 20 literate people. More than 30 illiterate people had to leave, sadly. In Xuedong's little face was as pale as snow. A gust of cold wind blew, and she suddenly shivered and woke up. She raised her head and saw only a dozen people around her. She couldn't help but be stunned. Chapter 89. From the first day In Xuedong entered the prisoner camp, people around her kept telling her that it was hopeless to get out of the prisoner camp in this life. Because the most basic requirement for those rich families to buy people was a healthy body, and she, In Xuedong, stroked her soft right arm with her left hand. This arm had been broken for more than half a year. The tendons and veins in it were necrotic. Even the best doctor in the Qinghe town couldn't cure it. She couldn't understand why a disabled person like her would be selected. She raised her head and saw the woman standing in the crowd who had never said a word. That was her future master. What was her standard for selecting people? In the third round, Chu Qingning took the dictionary of Dahan and began to test the knowledge of the remaining people more deeply. Some people answered very fluently, some people stammered, and some people were pale and couldn't answer at all. Soon it was In Xuedong's turn. She saw that Chu Qingning pointed to the first word of the first line on the first page of the dictionary of Dahan indifferently. She suddenly opened her eyes slightly. She clearly saw that this person turned to the middle to test others. Why did it become the simplest first page when it came to her? The first word was people. In Xuedong became more and more confused, but she also knew that it was a good opportunity. She immediately replied, nervously, "People are like you and me. They're all sentient beings in the world." Chu Qingning wanted to laugh and cry, but he finally didn't show any expression. He turned the dictionary of Dahan to the middle to test the next person. Soon, the remaining more than 30 people were divided into 3 teams. The first team couldn't answer, the second team answered half of the questions correctly, and the third team answered completely. Chu Qingning returned to Suli. Suli glanced at In Xuedong in the crowd, who had lost her right arm and was confused and a little excited. A ray of light flashed through her eyes. At this time, Fang Yuan also came. His lips were moving, but no sound came out. Condensed the sound into a line and transmitted the sound's secret. When Yin Zai saw this scene, his pupils instantly shrank. Transmitted the sound secret was a secret method that could only be mastered by the masters in the acquired 8th hurdle. The origin of these 3 people was really terrible. When he thought that he was only in the acquired 4th hurdle, he couldn't help but feel discouraged. It turned out that compared with the people in the martial arts circle, he was not as good as a servant. Hearing Fang Yuan's words, Suli nodded slightly. She inadvertently glanced at a skinny teenager in the first team. Then, she took the number plates of more than 30 people and began to pick the people herself. The boss of the broker house bent over and stood beside Suli. He immediately shouted cleverly, "Those whose names I read, stand out immediately." Suli looked at the boss of the broker house and selected 6 number plates and handed them to him. Zhang Hingyi, Li Sandan, Wu Yajun. Those whose names were called immediately looked happy and stood up. They were all on the team that couldn't answer at all. They didn't expect that they would be chosen, and they were overjoyed. The boss of the broker house stopped when he read the 6th name. It seemed to be over. In Xuedong's face turned pale. Sure enough, she was not there. "Mr. Li," the boss of the broker house held the number and asked with some doubts. The people she called out were not good. Why did she choose these people to buy? Su Li smiled slightly, and her strange voice sounded in front of a group of captives for the first time. "Except for these 6, I want the rest." Boss of the broker house, calculate the price. The boss of the broker house looked at the remaining 27 people and was suddenly dumbfounded. Almost all of them were bought. In addition to the 6 he had brought, there were a total of 33 people. Big business. The boss of the broker house was happy. Suddenly, he thought of the origin of the 3 people and couldn't help but feel bitter. He said honestly, "Mr. Li, the 6 boys of the broker house are not valuable. I can make the decision to give them to you, but you have to pay a sum of money for the captives. 1 person is 100 taels. 27 people, that is 2,700 taels of silver. Suli nodded slightly and gestured to Chu Qingning. The latter immediately took out 27 notes with a denomination of 100 taels of silver and handed them to the officer. Seeing that Suli was so forthright, the boss of the broker house immediately smiled. He helped the military camp to get so much money. His benefits were far greater than those of the 6 boys who were slaves. The officer was also happy to get the hot notes. He arranged 2 large carriages for Suli to go back. Before leaving, Suli looked at Yan Zai, who was a little distressed, and said slowly, "If you can't make up your mind, it's better to let them choose their own future." Yan Zai was slightly stunned when he heard that. He was about to ask what Suli meant, but he saw that she had gone away with the carriage. After coming to his sense, Yan Zai looked at a group of girls around him with eyes full of pleading. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He was really impulsive. As soon as they left the captives' camp, a group of young boys and girls sitting in the carriage immediately became restless. Pairs of eyes looked out and greedily breathed the air outside. Seeing that Chu Qingning was sitting on the edge of the carriage door and pretending to take a nap, the boys sitting in the innermost part of the carriage immediately wanted to escape. But as soon as he turned around, before he had time to climb out of the window, a knife suddenly flashed, and the tip of a knife was already against his neck. If he moved an inch further, he would see blood. The cold feeling from the blade immediately gave him goosebumps, and his whole body was stiff and couldn't move. Chu Qingning snorted coldly and took back the long knife. He said lightly, "If anyone dares to escape again, I will not be merciful. Master only wanted to buy 20 people. Now there are 13 more. It's not a big deal if 1 or 2 people die." As soon as he said this, the people sitting in the carriage suddenly became quiet. They just got out of that damn place, and no one wanted to die on the road. Seeing that everyone was quiet, Chu Qingning sat down again, but he was so angry in his heart. Suli definitely did it on purpose. She actually didn't let him stay in Xuedong's carriage. Thinking of this, he glanced at the thin boy sitting in the middle of the crowd, who seemed to be struggling to raise his head. He couldn't help but feel strange. He seemed to have seen this face somewhere, but he couldn't remember. Who was he to Fang Yuan? At this moment, the same escape happened in the previous carriage. Fang Yuan silently cut off an arm of the person who escaped, and the whole carriage suddenly became quieter than the captives' camp. Yin Xuedong shrank in the innermost part of the carriage with a pale face. She felt something was wrong. The person who bought them turned out to be from the martial arts circle. She used to hear people in her family that some evil families use people to do experiments, and the means were extremely cruel. She couldn't have been bought by that kind of family, right? Otherwise, why would they even want a severed arm? At the thought of this, Yin Xuedong's face became paler and bloodless. She just escaped from the wolves and entered the tiger's mouth. Just when Yin Xuedong was thinking about it and almost wanted to commit suicide, the carriage finally stopped. "Everyone, get off and turn. Don't make noise." Hearing Fang Yuan's voice, the 2 carriages were silent for a moment. The first one to get off was the skinny boy. He climbed out of the carriage with difficulty. When he saw the gorgeous building in front of him, his expression changed instantly. With the first one, the remaining 32 servants got off the carriage one after another. When they saw the luxurious and exquisite 3-story building, they were all shocked. Were they going to live here in the future? Su Li and the others didn't stop and walked into the restaurant. After a while, Haidin and others came out. They were originally beggars and were trained by Chu Qingning and Ling Li successively. At this moment, they had already shed the inferiority of beggars. They were all calm and composed, quite like disciples of big sections. They were all wearing the uniform of the Linli building designed by Su Li herself. There were 2 kinds of clothes. One was the ordinary maid's clothes, which were light blue and pink. The other was the black and gold steward's clothes worn by Haidin and others. The word Linli was embroidered with gold thread on the right chest. It was simple but imposing. Many of the prisoners of war who had never seen the world couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. Yin Xuedong and the skinny youth's eyes flashed at the same time. They could tell that these youths all had cultivations. Haydn had never been so glorious as today. He was very happy. However, he thought that he had even met young master. Naturally, he wouldn't be frightened by such a small scene. Then he said loudly, "You are in the Leanly building today. Those who pass the test and training will become the fellows of the Leanly building in the future. Come with me." Haydn led a group of people to bypass the Leanly building and came to the open space behind the Leanly building. There were a lot of bluestone bricks and wood. Haydn coughed slightly and pointed to the bricks and wood. He said, "This is your first test. Whoever can build his residence can pass the test and stay. During this period, the Leanly building will provide you with food so that you won't starve to death. As for the rest, you have to rely on yourselves. There are guards around this place. If you want to escape, don't blame me for being merciless." Haydn's words were not pleasant to hear, but everyone's eyes gradually brightened. There was something called hope in their hearts. They had been marked as prisoners of war. If they escaped, they would be killed immediately. They even thought about how miserable their future would be. However, they didn't expect that they would be bought as fellows. They would have food and shelter and even wouldn't be restricted in the future. Such a good thing couldn't be found easily. Almost without any hesitation, everyone immediately picked up the bricks and wood and began to build the house they would live in the future. The skinny boy's eyes burst with indescribable light. He grabbed a stone and was about to lift it up. However, he didn't move for a long time, which made others laugh. But the skinny boy seemed to have not heard it and continued to struggle with the stone. Shuedong gritted her teeth and pushed the stone with one hand. However, her right hand drooped. She couldn't pile up the stone. How could you build a house like this? Many people's eyes fell on the two people. Where there were people, there would be a competition. The skinny boy and Shuedong seemed to be the two worst among the 33 people. If there was no accident, they would soon be driven out of the Leanly building and become beggars on the street or go back to the prisoner camp where life was worse than death. Sure enough, it didn't take long for Haydn to reappear. He pointed at the skinny boy and Shuedong and shouted, "You two, come here." The skinny boy was sweating and panting like a tuberculosis ghost. It seemed that he would die in the next second. Hearing Haydn shout, he dragged his feet and slowly walked over. A trace of anxiety finally appeared in his silent eyes. His weak voice came into Haydn's ears. There is still a long time before the appointed date. I can build the house. He finally saw the chance to live. He didn't want to give up. Shuedong was also pale. She held her right arm, and her beautiful eyes were full of begging. Haydn looked strange, but he still didn't say anything. He waved his hand and said, "Come with me." Chapter 90. Haydn passed through the luxuriously decorated hall on the first floor and entered the room where the supervisor rested. Then he turned to the bookcase and gently twisted it. The bookcase immediately moved away slowly and revealed a secret door. The emaciated young man and Shuedong, who followed him, were slightly shocked. The situation seemed to be different from what they thought. They knew the secret of the dark door. If they wanted to leave, they must die first. "Come with me, you two." As Haydn spoke, he also muttered the words like luck, which made the two people confused. They could only follow Haydn and go on. The underground addendum did not appear in their imagination. After the three people passed through a stone path, their sight suddenly became clear. They came to a bright central room. If there were no windows around, the emaciated young man and Shuedong almost thought that they were on the ground. After Haydn sent them here, he asked them to wait for a while. Then he left alone and closed the door. Shuedong and the emaciated young man looked at each other and saw the doubts in each other's eyes. In the current situation, the two of them were just lowly servants. Who would want to see them? Tap, tap, tap. Suddenly, there was a sound of footsteps. The emaciated young man and Shuedong turned their heads at the same time and saw Feng Yuan and Chu Qingning coming together in a hurry. They didn't even have time to remove the disguise effect. Seeing the two people coming, the emaciated young man and Shuedong were shocked. When they were about to salute, they heard Chu Qingning said with a smile and anger, "Shuedong, Why do you lower your head? Don't you even recognize me? Ah. In Shuedong was flustered and looked up at Chu Qingning. She felt that his voice was very familiar. But when she saw Chu Qingning's face, she couldn't think of anything for a while. Fang Yuan snorted and picked up a pot of tea and poured it on Chu Qingning's face. The tea was still hot. Chu Qingning screamed in pain. Fang Yuan, you must have done it on purpose. How dare you vent your anger on me? Are you even human? I also suffered a loss, okay? Hearing the name, Fang Yuan, the emaciated young man's eyes lit up immediately. He was no longer silent, but full of excitement. Fang Yuan wiped the disguise on his face with water and took a deep breath. He smiled and said, "Moo, long time no see. Big brother, it's really you." The emaciated young man shouted excitedly as he stood up. Suddenly, his expression changed, and he bent down to cough violently. Soon, he coughed so much that blood came out of the corner of his mouth. With his current weakened body, he couldn't withstand such intense emotions. Fang Yuan's expression changed. He immediately left the addendum with Fang Mu in his arms, leaving In Shuedong and Chu Qingning looking at each other. In Shuedong's beautiful eyes were full of tears. She stared blankly at Chu Qingning, whose face was a little red because of the heat. The next moment, she couldn't help but plunge into Chu Qingning's chest. "Qingning, I thought I would never see you again. They all said that you're dead." Chu Qingning let the person in his arms cry bitterly. His eyes were full of affection. He closed his eyes and sighed with satisfaction. He also thought that he would never see her again, but fate was so miraculous that they met again. Gently stroking In Shuedong's soft right arm, Chu Qingning said in an unprecedentedly gentle voice, "Don't be afraid. Everything will be fine." Feeling the slight pain from her right arm, In Shuedong's eyes dimmed slightly. Immediately, she was intoxicated in the tranquil atmosphere and didn't think about anything else. In the urgent footsteps, more blood spilled from Fang Mu's mouth, but he smiled brightly. If he didn't get angry, he could probably live longer. But he didn't expect that he could see his big brother in the end. He had no regrets. "Big brother, bury me here after I die. We are all homeless people. How about letting me stay with you?" Fang Mu kept talking while bleeding, and his blood dyed Fang Yuan's arm red. The blue veins on Fang Yuan's forehead were exposed. He was so anxious that he shouted coldly, "Shut up. You can still live. She can save you." "Save me?" Fang Mu smiled. As he smiled, his eyes gradually became lax, and he was about to close completely. His breathing instantly became weak. At this time, Fang Yuan finally arrived at Su Li's room. Bang! He kicked open the door of Su Li's room, and his eyes were full of begging help. After 5 minutes, Su Li took back the last needle, and Fang Mu's breathing also stabilized. Fang Yuan breathed a long sigh of relief. "This guy is lucky. If you come a little later, he will go to hell." Su Li sorted out the medicine cabinet. He once used an extremely powerful backfire method. Now his body is empty, and the 5 elements are in disorder. He is extremely weak. Even if he is saved, he can only live for a few months. Fang Yuan looked gloomy when he heard the words. "It's the secret method of exploding poisonous insects of my Fang family. He consumes his life in exchange for a moment of strength." Su Li, is he really hopeless? Fang Yuan asked this question with a fluke. Unexpectedly, Su Li nodded naturally and said, "Of course, but it will cost a lot. Why should I save him?" Fang Yuan's face brightened, and he didn't care about Su Li's tone at all. "What do I have to pay?" He had been used to the mode of getting along with Su Li. Just now, in order to let Su Li take in Fang Mu and In Shuedong, he and Chu Qingning paid different prices. Su Li turned her eyes, tilted her head, and smiled. "Do you know what Chu Qingning paid in order to let me treat In Shuedong's arm?" Looking at Su Li's clear eyes, Fang Yuan felt cold and asked subconsciously, "What?" "To work for me for a lifetime." Su Li smiled sweetly, and her tone suddenly became cold. "No matter what I say, he will do it without hesitation, even if he will die, and he will do it without hesitation." "That idiot!" Fang Yuan scolded secretly. He knew without thinking that the guy had lost his mind for his woman. He just promised Su Li that he would work for Su Li for 10 years to the best of his ability. He was the first to join Su Li, so he knew it better than anyone else. Su Li was not a good person. On the contrary, she was extremely good at calculation. She was an open and above-board villain who had never hidden her naked ambition. She must have her own purpose to take in so many people. From the night when he killed people, she said, there will be more and more terrible dangers in the future. But so what? Fang Yuan suddenly smiled. Even without these rules and regulations, he was willing to go through fire and water for Su Li without hesitation. Then I will also work for you for a lifetime, like him. Fang Yuan's tone was very calm. He didn't gnash his teeth like Chu Qingning. Su Li looked at Fang Yuan and was slightly stunned. Then she immediately smiled brightly. In this way, I also have 2 real subordinates, which is really a good feeling. Su Li's eyes flashed. She suffered a loss in her previous life because she was alone. If she had a force in her hand, how could she fall into the situation of death by dismemberment? She even had no power to avenge her disabled husband. Fang Yuan twitched his mouth and showed helplessness. Looking at Su Li's happy smile, he felt a little distressed for some reason. I exchanged my freedom for your happiness, but still can't stop the sadness in your heart. In this case, I will cure him now, so that you won't regret temporarily. Then I will suffer losses. Su Li held the silver needle in Fang Mu's abdomen with one hand. A wisp of green light suddenly appeared and penetrated into Fang Mu's body along the silver needle. Fang Mu's face immediately became ruddy at a speed visible to the naked eye, and his breathing became strong and powerful. If this scene was seen by other doctors, they would definitely exclaim that there was one more miracle-working doctor in the world. Fang Yuan stood aside, and his eyes showed shock. After all, he was not a doctor. It was the first time for him to touch this kind of power full of vitality. But even so, it did not prevent him from understanding the preciousness of this power. It can actually supplement the 5 elements of the human body. What kind of magical power is it? Su Li has never used it before. Is it the power that she realized recently? But Su Li is obviously an ordinary person. For a moment, Fang Yuan's vision of Su Li, which was slightly clear, became blurred again. He found that even if he was beside Su Li, he still couldn't see the real details of Su Li. Except for her origin, no one could see the real details of Su Li. After a quarter of an hour, Su Li withdrew her hand. Her face became pale and her breath was slightly rapid. She said slowly, I am not capable enough to cure this Aquila at one time. Let him have a good rest in these 7 days. When he is fully adapted, I will carry out the next treatment. It is estimated that he will be able to return to normal and start practicing again after 3 treatments. Fang Yuan was speechless. Was it not capable enough? If it were other doctors, they would definitely ask him to prepare for Fang Mu's funeral. Su Li only needed 1 month to cure him. She was simply a miracle-working doctor. I didn't expect that your medical skills and poison skills are equally powerful. Fang Yuan rarely sighed, but Su Li smiled sweetly and said, You are wrong. My medical skills are far worse than the poison skills. If I want to do it, the entire Qinghe town will instantly become a dead city. Fang Yuan's scalp was numb. He really wanted to ask if it was true, but he saw that Su Li had already packed up the medicine box and ordered, The road is full of blood. Don't forget to clean it up. Looking at the pool of blood on the ground, Fang Yuan was speechless for a while. Fang Mu frowned. When the light returned to his eyes, he sat up with a quiver. Looking at his slightly plump and white slender hands, he was suddenly stunned. I am not dead? Fang Yuan turned back and knocked on his head. Eldest brother said that you will not die. So you will not die? You bastard. Do you know that I even lost my life for you? Fang Mu was suddenly stunned. He covered his head and repeatedly begged for mercy. After that, Fang Yuan and Chu Qingning met. Seeing that Chu Qingning and Yin Xuedong were so attached to each other, Fang Yuan suddenly felt sick. When Chu Qingning saw Fang Mu, whose face was ruddy and body was much stronger, he immediately laughed and said, Hey, boy, don't vomit blood. I thought you were going to die just now. Fong Mu scratched his head embarrassedly. Eldest brother Chu, you must be joking. Do you still remember me? I am Fong Mu of the Fong family. I'm a collateral relative, but eldest brother Fong Yuan treats me very well. Chu Qingning touched his chin and nodded. You were so thin before. Fortunately, Fong Yuan could recognize you. Yin Xuedong looked at Fong Mu with her eyes full of curiosity. She just saw that Fong Mu kept vomiting blood. She did not expect that after a while, he was full of vigor. Xuedong, now you can rest assured. The owner of this winery is a miracle-working doctor. She can definitely cure your hand. Chu Qingning guaranteed. For this hand, he had sacrificed his life. According to Su Li's character, if she couldn't cure it, she would definitely not let him agree to such an excessive request. Is it Mr. Li? Yin Xuedong asked timidly. Both of you are his servants. It's not good to talk like this, right? Chu Qingning's face darkened, and Fong Yuan immediately smiled. At this moment, Su Li came in from outside the door. Under the curious gaze of Fong Mu and Yin Xuedong, she sat at the table and poured herself a cup of tea. Chapter 91. Hearing Su Li's words, Fong Yuan and Chu Qingning were helpless at the same time. They didn't know what she wanted to do, but since she asked them to go out, Su Li must have something to say to Fong Mu and Yin Xuedong alone. Chu Qingning stood up first, scratched his head, and gave Yin Xuedong a reassuring look. Then he walked out of the underground addendum with Fong Yuan and closed the door. Fong Mu and Yin Xuedong looked at each other and were shocked to see Su Li, who seemed to be younger than them. She just said, was she Mr. Li? Was Mr. Li actually a young girl? Yin Xuedong couldn't help but compare their heights. It seemed that Mr. Li was a little taller than Su Li in the daytime. It was strange. Su Li drank the tea and looked at Fong Mu and Yin Xuedong with a smile. She said first, for the sake of Fong Yuan and Chu Qingning, I will cure you too, and the Linli building will also take you in. However, all these come with conditions. Fong Mu and Yin Xuedong were nervous. What conditions? They didn't know that Chu Qingning and Fong Yuan agreed to Su Li's unreasonable request for them. At this moment, they were perturbed. They walked all the way from the battlefield to the prisoner camp. They knew that there was no free lunch in the world. It's very simple. Su Li pointed to Fong Mu and said, after your injury is healed, I will prescribe medicine to restore your cultivation as soon as possible. After that, you will work for me like Fong Yuan. Usually, you will stay in the Linli building to be responsible for safety. Is there any problem? Fong Mu was shocked and stammered excitedly. I can continue to practice? Su Li's eyebrows flashed coldly, and she said lightly, do you think I will take a waste? Fong Mu shrank his neck and shook his head quickly. He couldn't help but have a trace of fear for Su Li. The girl in front of him seemed to be about the same age as him, but the inexplicable momentum she exuded made people unconsciously feel frightened. Seeing Fong Mu's reaction, Su Li's expression instantly recovered. She smiled warmly and said, then I will take it that you agree. Fong Mu, work hard in the future. Fong Mu agreed in a muddle-headed way. Although he felt that something was wrong, his eldest brother, Fong Yuan, was here, so he felt very peaceful. Besides, his life was saved by Mr. Li. Even if he died for the Linli building, what was the harm? You're next. Su Li's sharp eyes fell on Yin Xuedong, which made Yin Xuedong's ruddy face turn pale. She said, within a month, I will make you recover like Fong Mu. In the future, you will be the shopkeeper of the Linli building. Is there any problem? What? I'm a shopkeeper? Yin Xuedong exclaimed. She couldn't think straight for a while. She had only been here for a day, and she was just a slave. How could this girl directly give her such an important position as the shopkeeper? What, you don't want to? Su Li tilted her head and said strangely, Chu Qingning assured me that you have shown talent in overall planning before. You can be the shopkeeper of the Linli building with ease. Could it be that he was lying? Then I'll have to settle the score with him. Yin Xuedong shook her head quickly and denied. Then she firmly nodded and said, I will run the Linli building well and won't let you down. Suli smiled slightly and stood up. She glanced at the two people who were confused and said, "My name is Suli. You two remember it." Then, Suli left, leaving the two people who hadn't recovered from the series of fright. After a long time, Fong Mu said with difficulty and sighed deeply, "What a terrible momentum. She is obviously of the same generation. Is she Mr. Li?" In Shiwedong had the same feeling and nodded repeatedly. But a trace of doubt flashed in her eyes, because Su Li neither denied nor admitted that she was Mr. Li from the beginning to the end. Were Su Li and Mr. Li the same person? She and Fong Mu still needed time to understand each other. After today, Fong Mu and In Shiwedong never appeared in front of the other 31 people. Everyone thought that the two people had been secretly killed by the Linli building. So, they acted more quickly for fear that they would be like them. In less than half a month, rows of black brick and tile-roofed houses were built behind the Linli building, which looked very neat. After the houses were built, everyone was so tired that they collapsed on the ground. But with the nutrition provided by the Linli building, their physical fitness was improved. They wouldn't feel very tired even if they worked in an ordinary restaurant for a day. Haydn appeared in the backyard on time. He clapped his hands and said loudly, "Very good. Congratulations on passing the first round of tests. According to the construction speed of the houses, I will give you a number. When you work in the winery, you can use the number instead of your name." Several people who still had some strength struggled to sit up. Their faces were full of joy. 3 days later, on the 15th day of the first lunar month, the Linli building will open. You don't have time to rest. You should be familiar with the business of a winery in these 3 days. Now, go to the bathhouse to take a bath and start the training immediately. Hearing the order of Haydn, everyone dragged their tired bodies to stand up. But they stared at the new clothes in the hands of the person behind Haydn. They couldn't hide the excitement in their eyes. They didn't remember how long they hadn't taken a bath and put on new clothes. Even if it was just the clothes of the waiters, they felt very happy. The bathhouse was divided into men and women. Among the 31 people, less than half were women, so it didn't cause chaos. The first teenager who took a bath climbed out of the bathhouse to dry himself. When he touched the clothes that had been prepared on the side, he was stunned. These clothes are actually silk instead of linen. The teenager was shocked. What was the origin of the Linli building? They even passed silk to the lowliest servants. They were so rich. The waiters were busy in the winery and would definitely dirty their clothes. It was really a waste to use such good cloth to make clothes for the waiters. On the other side, the women also took a bath and put on new clothes with joy. They didn't think too much. They just felt that the silk clothes were really comfortable. After everyone changed their clothes, their faces suddenly changed. They stood in front of Haydn again. Haydn nodded. Boss and others were really smart. The people they chose were all very good. Besides, they could persist in the test. Their willpower was also qualified. The men were left to assign their tasks. All the women went to the kitchen with Fong Ling. Fong Ling taught them the basic process of processing ingredients. Learning was a process. It couldn't be accomplished overnight. Su Li's idea was to let this group of people cope with the chaos when the winery just opened. As for their abilities, they could be cultivated slowly in the future. As long as there was no problem with their brains, she had ways to squeeze their potential and make these people progress quickly. After all, she had been the hierarch of the Inma cult for a period of time in her previous life. When a group of people hurriedly adapted to the work of the winery, it was finally the 15th day of the first lunar month, the Lantern Festival. As the first full moon night of the new year, the Lantern Festival was naturally one of the most important festivals in the Dahan country. The entire Qinghe town was bustling early. Every street was decorated with lanterns and ribbons. People began to arrange lanterns for the Lantern Festival. Various folk performances were also being prepared. The Linli building was also decorated with lanterns and ribbons. A group of teenagers in brand new clothes wiped the inside and outside of the building again and again. There were more and more people on the street. Chu Qingning and Fong Yuan wore masks and danced lions in front of the door. Their movements were extraordinary. They played the lions vividly. Many people stopped to watch and applauded. Crackle, crackle. A series of firecrackers suddenly sounded outside the door. The door of the Leanly building was opened. Three maids walked out from both sides and bowed to wait quietly. Then In Shuedong, who wore a white velvet skirt and was carefully dressed, walked out of the door with a smile. She said loudly, "People of the Qinghe town, I am the shopkeeper of the Leanly building. Nice to meet you. Today is the Lantern Festival and the opening day of the Leanly Bureau. All the drinks are uniformly discounted. There are also fine wine and snacks for free. The Leanly building welcomes all the drinkers." The attention of the people who were watching the lion dance was immediately attracted. Seeing In Shuedong's fair and delicate face, many people thought that she was so beautiful. Then they couldn't help but be surprised when they heard that she was the shopkeeper. The woman looked only 15 or 16 years old. How could she be the shopkeeper of the Leanly building? At this time, they also found that both the shopkeeper and the servants of the Leanly building were all teenagers and quite energetic. It turns out that the Leanly building is a winery. The name is really elegant. Today, the drinks are discounted and the fine wine is free. I will go in and have a taste. Let's go. Let's go in together. I have a lot of friends who usually drink with me. I will go back and call them together. For a time, a large number of drinkers poured into the restaurant. Seeing the chic and gorgeous decoration of the restaurant, they were amazed. They had never seen such a well-decorated winery. It was a kind of enjoyment to just sit in it without drinking. After watching, the customers finally noticed the two extremely simple signs hanging behind the counter. Osmanthus wine, 1 tael per pot, discounted price. Osmanthus cake, 500 taels per plate, free taste of one. Only 2 dishes. All the customers who came in were dumbfounded. Such a big restaurant only had 2 dishes. Was it a joke? Is it a child who has nothing to do? So he opened it to play tricks on people. The discounted wine is actually sold for 1 tael per pot. It is more expensive than the restaurant. Is the original price 10 taels? What is osmanthus wine? Why haven't I heard of this kind of wine before? For a time, all the people who came in to join in the fun were confused. They sat in the restaurant and didn't know what to do. No one ordered. The scene was quiet and fell into an awkward silence. In Shuedong didn't change her expression. She winked at the person secretly. Immediately, a child of a rich family in disguise shouted, "Who cares what it is? Just ask him to come and have a taste. Waiter, give me a pot of osmanthus wine and a plate of osmanthus cake. Don't forget to send the free osmanthus cake up." As soon as he said that, there was a burst of laughter in the restaurant, and the atmosphere was relaxed. Many people began to order. However, most people only wanted to have a taste of the free osmanthus cake. As for the osmanthus wine, which cost 1 tael per pot, they would not consider it until others had tasted it. Soon, the osmanthus cake and osmanthus wine ordered by the person were served. The servant, who pretended to be a child of a rich family, casually poured himself a cup of osmanthus wine. The clear and sticky wine with a little golden color gently rippled in the cup. Chapter 92. In the cold winter, the wine cup was steaming. The fragrance of osmanthus slowly spread in the building. The experienced drinkers nearby couldn't help but swallow their saliva and watch the rich child drink it. Insu didn't expect that he would have such a good thing on the first day of his work. Although he had a high requirement for acting skills, he used a cheat in Nanjiang country. Later, he was caught by the government, and then he joined the army as a cannon fodder. When the wine entered his throat, the imagined spiciness did not spread from his heart. Instead, it was replaced by a soft sweetness. The taste was smooth, as if it was silk instead of wine. The strong fragrance of osmanthus penetrated into his limbs and bones. The pores all over his body seemed to open, and he felt extremely comfortable. It's not wine. It's clearly an addictive poison. Insu drank a cup and was a little drunk. At this moment, he had forgotten that he was still acting. He picked up an osmanthus cake and stuffed it into his mouth without caring about his image. His whole mouth was immediately wrapped by a completely different sweetness. He chewed it carefully. It was soft and oily, sweet, but not greasy. The fragrance of rice was wrapped in the fragrance of osmanthus. The deliciousness was clearly layered. The sweetness was mixed with the freshness, which was memorable. Insu was totally intoxicated. He didn't need any pretentious performance. His expression had already explained everything. Many people couldn't help but order. They wanted to know why Insu became like that just after drinking a cup of wine and eating a piece of osmanthus cake. As pots of osmanthus wine were served on the table, the fragrance of osmanthus in the entire winery was more intense. The real good wine never needed any publicity. After tasting the first sip, those old drunkards were immediately ecstatic, as if they got the most precious treasure. After drinking one by one, they excitedly walked out of the restaurant. Obviously, they went to show off to their drinking friends. In Shiwedong could imagine how lively the Linli building would be tomorrow. It's delicious. I want to drink more. Insu shouted with a red face. Obviously, he forgot his identity. In Shiwedong shook her head and quickly asked someone to help him out. She couldn't help but smile slightly. For the sake that he successfully opened up the situation of the Linli building, she didn't blame him for drinking indiscriminately. The osmanthus wine alone is enough to make the Linli building famous in the Qinghe town. But the dishes are a little monotonous. I don't know if Mr. Lee has other ideas. At night, the Lantern Festival was bustling with noise and excitement. People could smell the faint fragrance of osmanthus in the streets close to the Linli building. More and more people came because of the smell, which made the peddlers on the street happy. Suli stood on the roof and looked at the lively scene downstairs. A smile flashed on her calm face. In Shiwedong's ability was good. She didn't need to worry about the Linli building at ordinary times, which was a surprise. However, she looked towards the south of Qinghe City. In a few more days, some people with ulterior motives would make a move. On the second day, the number of drinkers who came to the Linli building to taste the wine was more than twice that of yesterday. The waiters kept serving them. Soon, the second floor of the winery was full. The faces of the customers who came yesterday changed slightly when they saw the sign on the wall. They seemed to have forgotten something very important. Osmanthus wine, 10 taels per pot. Osmanthus cake, 5 taels per plate. That's right. Yesterday, the shopkeeper said that drinks would be sold at a 10% discount on the first day of business. Today, the original price has been restored. What's going on? Oldly, 10 taels a pot? It's enough for me to go to Lai Fu Inn to drink 10 bottles of bamboo wine. Oldly, I came here because of your bragging. I didn't expect that you cheated me. Tell me, how much did you charge the winery? We treat you as a friend. How can you treat us like this? For a time, the voices of criticism were constantly in the building. Many people like Oldly were extremely angry. Anyone who brought friends to share good things with good intentions was misunderstood. He would never feel good. But the more it was so, the more Oldly wanted to prove that he was right. Are you kidding me? Am I that kind of person? Oldly looked angry. He waved his hand and said, Waiter, give me 3 pots of osmanthus wine. Today, I will show you what real wine is. The bamboo wine of Lai Fu Inn is bullshit. Compare with the osmanthus wine of the Linli building. It can't even be called wine. Looking at the angry face of his old friend, many drinkers who were about to leave suddenly stopped and turned back to sit down again. Well, Oldly, I will taste the magical osmanthus wine that you said. It makes you praise it so much. As early as in the yard, Haydn brewed a large number of osmanthus wine. After the original wine was diluted, it could be directly served on the table. It was very fast. Before Oldly and others waited for a long time, the waiter put 3 pots of hot wine on the table and a plate of osmanthus cake. Oldly was stunned and said hurriedly, Wait, I didn't order osmanthus cake. The waiter immediately smiled and said, Our master said that you are a person who loves wine. This plate of osmanthus cake is a bonus. Oldly's eyes were wet when he heard that. Looking at the plate of osmanthus cake, he felt that he was about to cry. Thank your shopkeeper for me. The waiter didn't correct the difference between shopkeeper and master. He nodded and went away. Suli stood on the top floor and watched this scene. Her smile was full of deep meaning. When a person was doubted and denied, even if he was only given a small favor, He would remember it deeply and immediately regard the person who gave the gift as a confidant. Sure enough, people's hearts were so fragile. For people who loved wine, the power of wine had no upper limit. When a group of old drunkards drank the osmanthus wine, yesterday's scene immediately repeated, and it was even crazier. Oldly, I was wrong. This wine should only be available in heaven. How can we smell it in the human world? Oldly, you hurt me. After I drank the osmanthus wine, I thought of the green bamboo wine. I didn't know how to drink it. It's really not expensive to sell such sweet wine for 10 taels of silver for a pot. Leanly building, I want to live here. I still like the spicy taste. I hope that the Leanly building can produce new wine as soon as possible. Waiter, pack 2 more plates of osmanthus cake. I want to take them back to my wife to taste. For a time, the restaurant was constantly praised and set off a buying frenzy. In just half a day, hundreds of pots of osmanthus wine and thousands of plates of osmanthus cake were sold. Inchiweddong was so scared that she hurriedly announced that today's inventory was insufficient and the restaurant would be open tomorrow. Although the inventory of the winery was sufficient, and the dried osmanthus flower was also collected in several warehouses last autumn, it couldn't stand such a crazy buying. Moreover, she also knew that there must be speculators among the customers. Otherwise, no matter how good the reputation of the winery was, it could not sell so much in just one day. However, I still need to tell Suli about it. Thinking of this, Inchiweddong went to the attic on the top floor. Before she knocked on the door, she heard a voice coming from inside. I already know the specific things. In the future, the osmanthus wine and osmanthus cake will be limited and can't be bought in large quantities. The specific quantity is up to you. Inchiweddong was shocked, and then her scalp was slightly numb. It turned out that the current situation of the winery had been seen by her, but she didn't say it clearly. If she didn't come today, would the shopkeeper be changed tomorrow? Yes, I see. Inchiweddong didn't open the door. She obediently said outside the door and turned to go downstairs. At the same time, she secretly decided to do better than before. That night, in the underground adytum, Chu Qingning, Inchiweddong, Feng Yuan, and Feng Mu gathered together. Chiweddong, tell me how much money the winery has made these days. Chu Qingning's eyes were shining, and he looked like a miser. Inchiweddong rolled her eyes at him and said slowly, the osmanthus wine we are selling now is diluted 100 times. The net profit is 9 taels per pot. The profit of osmanthus cake is a little lower, about 3 taels per plate. Today, we have sold more than 500 pots of osmanthus wine and more than 1,200 plates of osmanthus cake. Excluding the odd amount, the Leanly building has made at least 8,000 taels. Thinking of this, Inchiweddong couldn't help but take a deep breath. The profit of osmanthus wine was terrible. Moreover, wine was not like dishes. Even if people drank it all the time, they wouldn't get tired of it. People who liked to drink even needed to make a little wine every day to feel happy. Unlike dishes, if people ate it every day, they would get tired of it. In this way, as soon as the Leanly building opened, it became a money tree that made 8,000 taels a day. Feng Mu's eyes were wide open, and he couldn't help drooling. It turned out that the eldest brother had such a powerful backer. No wonder his cultivation rose sharply. He reached the acquired 8th hurdle in less than half a year. It was much faster than in the family. Feng Yuan and Chu Qingning had no reaction. They had already seen Su Li's ability to make money, so they were not surprised by the money. Su Li didn't spend a penny before, and she extorted 400,000 taels from Su Huanli. Then, the Leanly building was established. Compared with that, the daily income of 8,000 taels was a piece of cake. How does Su Li think? She not only cooks delicious dishes, but also brews wine so well. Chu Qingning smiled and couldn't help but pat Feng Yuan's back. He said, in this way, we won't suffer any loss if we follow her. Feng Yuan rolled his eyes. Inchiweddong and Feng Mu were both confused. What loss? What riddles were they talking about? At this moment, in the study of a magnificent mansion in the south city of the Qinghe town. Master, many of the restaurants you chose have agreed to transfer. The middle-aged man who looked like a steward bowed and said respectfully. Beside the desk in front of him, a handsome young man with a cold expression and dressed in luxurious golden clothes was staring fixedly at the ancient scroll in his hand. From the back of his hand, one could vaguely discern that this was a cultivation technique illustration. Hearing the housekeeper's words, the young man snorted and said slowly, "Tell me, which restaurants are there?" The housekeeper quickly replied, "There are 3 in total. One is the Laifu Inn in the center of the city. The owner of this inn is not famous, so he naturally dares not to offend you, master. The other 2 are the Yuelai Inn in the east of the city and the Huaman Inn in the west of the city. These 2 are old inns that have been operating for many years. Their locations are a little remote, but they are good places with stable traffic." The young man nodded slightly and seemed to be satisfied. He looked up and asked, "Then, how about the income of the inn?" "The Laifu Inn is the highest. It can earn 3,000 taels every day." The housekeeper answered fluently. "The other 2 are 2,500 taels and 2,700 taels respectively." The young man frowned slightly. He put down the scroll in his hand and stood up slowly. His eyes were as cold as lightning. "You have inquired for so long, but you only found 3 rubbish restaurants for me?" The housekeeper was suddenly shocked and knelt down. "Master, I try my best. The other restaurants and inns are supported by the rich and powerful families like us. They're supported by senior officials. We really can't afford to offend them." The young man sneered, "I promised my father that since I want to have achievements in business, I can't do it on a small scale. The 3 inns you mentioned don't even have the ability to earn 5,000 taels a day. How can they match my identity?" Chapter 93. "Oh." The young man raised his eyebrows and showed a look of interest. "What is that place?" "On the second-class street in the east of the city, there's a leanly building. It sells the best wine, osmanthus wine. It has been overcrowded for only 2 days since it opened." The butler kept bragging for fear that the young man was dissatisfied, but I haven't found out the background behind it yet. I only know that a person named Mr. Lee went to the broker house to select people a few days ago. Now, those people have become waiters of the Leanly building. The young man was more interested. "It is interesting that it can earn 7,000 taels in 2 days since it opened. I have never heard of Mr. Lee. He is a secretive person and probably doesn't have great skills. You can go to receive the reward. Tomorrow, go to see the supervisor of the Leanly building. If they don't agree, do you know what to do?" The butler was overjoyed and immediately knelt and kowtowed. "Thank you, master. I know. The next day, Suli came to the Qinghe girls' school in casual clothes. Today was the first day of school, and it was very lively. "Lecturer Su is here." "Haha, Lecturer Su." Lecturers passing by saw Su Li and greeted her very cordially. They all knew that Su Li not only became the special class lecturer of the Qinghe girls' school, but also the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop in the Qinghe town. It could be said that she perfectly inherited the 2 identities of Gong, Xiangjuan, and became the person whose status was second only to satrap Yan in the Qinghe town. Su Li obtained such a high achievement at such a young age. The halo on her was so dazzling that it almost blinded others. Back to the courtyard of the school, Mammy Li had nothing to do. During this time, Xiaowu and Su Li lived here and cleaned every day. The floor in the room was so clean that it could almost reflect people's figures. Mammy Li quickly went to cook. Seeing that Su Li built a winery that was more profitable than the Baiwei building, she was completely at ease. Su Li looked at the back of Mammy Li, and a ray of light flashed in her eyes. She wanted to ask why Mammy Li was so familiar with the Qinghe girls' school, but if she asked directly, Mammy Li might not answer. Although the relationship between them was tight enough, it did not include confessing the secrets that were difficult to say to each other in the past. "It seems that I have to find a way to test it." Su Li narrowed her eyes slightly. She would never let the hidden danger stay by her side. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Su Li changed into the costume of Mr. Li and passed through the high walls of the School of Liberal Arts and the School of Martial Arts like a wisp of smoke. Then she came to the martial arts field. Looking at the empty arena, she picked up the bow on the table and pulled the bowstring under the dim moonlight. Her right eye squinted as she pulled the bowstring to the fullest. His fingers loosened. Clang! An arrow streaked across the night sky like a bolt of lightning, directly piercing through the bullseye and nailing itself firmly to the ground. The tail of the arrow was still trembling. Suli changed to a stronger bow and took a deep breath. For the next part of the plan, it was time for her archery and swordsmanship to be practiced again. While Suli was practicing her bow, Feng Yuan and others gathered together in the underground addendum of the Leanly building and frowned. Did you find out? What is the background of the man who claimed to be the butler of the Jin family? Feng Yuan looked at Chu Qingning. Chu Qingning looked a little embarrassed and said, I went to the Tinya house and inquired about it. It is the Jin family in the Qinghe town. At least 5 people in the family are officials in the imperial court. Recently, the first master of the family has been looking for a restaurant to bribe. It is said that this is a task given by his father. If he succeeds, he will be the next successor of the Jin family. We've hit the muzzle of the gun. As soon as they heard the background of the Jin family, Yin Xuedong and Feng Mu changed their faces slightly. Even Feng Yuan frowned unconsciously and said, the Jin family has some background. Contact Suli. We can't make the decision. Then, Feng Yuan immediately got up and walked out. He soon disappeared outside the door. Yin Xuedong asked curiously, Isn't Suli in the restaurant? Where else will she go except here? Chu Qingning scratched his head and said, She will go to the Qinghe girls' school. Go to school? There was a trace of envy in Yin Xuedong's eyes. She also wanted to go further in talent and learning, but she was not qualified now. At this time, Chu Qingning laughed and said, How could she go to school? She goes to class. Although she looks like a profiteer, she is the special class lecturer of the Qinghe girls' school. Besides, she is also the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop. Her status is comparable to that of the satrap. Tut-tut. Yin Xuedong opened her mouth slightly in surprise. Her beautiful eyes were shining. Gradually, there was something called worship. Suli was so powerful. Did she have such a high status? Chu Qingning said with a sneaky expression. He whispered, I told you secretly. Don't tell others. The relationship between Su Li and the winery has not been exposed. If Su Li knows that I told you, she will definitely skin me. Yin Xuedong nodded repeatedly, and there was a little fear in her eyes. She was afraid that Chu Qingning would be skinned by Su Li. Feng Mu was speechless. Brother Chu's temperament didn't change at all. He was more daring than the sky. Aren't you afraid of being driven out of the Leanly building if you talk about your master like this? Tonight was destined to be a sleepless night. The sky gradually turned white. Suli put down the bow and arrow and quickly destroyed the traces of her coming. When she returned to the courtyard, she suddenly noticed that there was someone in the room, but she soon relaxed. The Numa was obviously Feng Yuan. Opening the door, Suli sat down and poured herself a cup of tea. Feng Yuan flashed out from behind the bed. There was a rare trace of anger in his eyes. Where have you been? I have been waiting for you here all night. Suli seemed to be startled by the voice. She turned around and saw Feng Yuan. Her eyes flashed with anger. She said, Feng Yuan, why are you hiding here instead of in the winery? Feng Yuan felt a little sorry in his heart, but it was soon covered by anger. He said, Where have you been? Do you know that I am worried about you? The last sentence came from Feng Yuan's heart. Suli looked at Feng Yuan and suddenly smiled. She said, Don't forget that only the master can limit the freedom of the servant. You are working for me now. Do you want to limit my actions? Feng Yuan's eyes darkened. He completely calmed down and whispered, Of course not. That's good. Suli poured a cup of tea for Feng Yuan and didn't mean to explain her whereabouts. She said, Tell me, why are you looking for me? Feng Yuan picked up the teacup, and a wry smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Falling flowers yearn for love, heartless brook. He finally understood the meaning of this sentence. Then, Feng Yuan told Su Li what the Jin family found. Su Li was surprised. She had been waiting for the embroidery workshop to make trouble, but she didn't expect that the winery was the first one to make trouble. Jean family. All kinds of scenes appeared in Su Li's mind, and her eyes became darker. She took the special paper of the winery and quickly wrote a letter and gave it to Fong Yuan. Hand this letter to County Governor Manor. Fong Yuan took the letter, but Yin Zai's face appeared in his mind unconsciously. Should I look for him for help? But they had no friendship with Yin Zai, so why would he help them? Fong Yuan couldn't figure out Su Li's intention, but he still took the envelope and left. He had absolute confidence in Su Li's scheme. What was written in the letter was definitely not asking for help. The next day, the butler of the Jean family came again. In Shuedong refused with the excuse of asking for the master, but she was very uneasy. She always felt that the butler would take action soon. Although it was just intuition, Fong Yuan and Chu Qingning still arranged Haidin and others to guard around the Linli building, and they guarded one side respectively. It was dark and windy at night. The servants in the Linli building soon fell asleep. Fong Yuan was in the dark, holding a sword in his hand and leaning against the wall to sleep. Soon, a slight sound of breaking through the air sounded. He suddenly opened his eyes and rushed to the corner of the second floor like a civet. In the faint night light, Fong Yuan clearly saw a dozen black shadows quietly cut the door of the Linli building and then rushed in. Sure enough, they come. Fong Yuan smiled coldly and waved his right hand gently. Chu Qingning immediately understood and let people hiding in every corner of the building ignite the sleeping smoke. The sleeping smoke spread very fast. Before long, there was a sound of a dozen heavy objects falling in the building. Haidin and others who had already taken the antidote showed a wretched smile. They immediately extinguished the sleeping incense and dragged a dozen men in black into the underground addendum. They tied them up and locked them up. After opening the window to ventilate, the smell of sleeping incense dissipated. Chu Qingning shook his head and said, "The sleeping incense is really good. The Jean family is also a famous and distinguished family. How can they even do such dirty things?" Fong Yuan was expressionless and said coldly, "The more powerful a family is, the more dirty things it will do. You and I have met a lot of dirty things." Chu Qingning suddenly became speechless and sullen. Fong Yuan was like eating gunpowder in the past 2 days. He often choked people. Chu Qingning didn't know why he was angry. Forget it. As a married man, I don't care about him. Thinking that In Shuedong was still waiting for him in the room, Chu Qingning smiled. He didn't bother to interrogate the men in black and left in a hurry. Fong Yuan came to the underground addendum alone and lifted the masks of the men in black one by one. As expected, they were all servants of the Jean family. The intelligence system of the Tianya house was very terrifying. Even the means that the Jean family used to deal with the three families were clear. Because they got the news in advance, they could be prepared. Hierarch of the Inma cult, young master, Fong Yuan muttered to himself. His eyes were darker. He looked at the dozens of people who were tied up in the room, and his face showed a ruthless expression. For a day and a night, the dull screams were mixed with despair. However, the ground was full of guests and was very lively. The butler of the Jean family waited in the room with a gloomy face. He felt more and more uneasy. The people he sent yesterday were like hitting a dog with a meat bun. None of them came back. It was really weird. Is there any force behind the Linli building? The butler looked at the portrait sent by a special person. There were only 2 faces in the portrait. One was Fong Yuan and Chu Qingning, and the other was a man in a bamboo hat without a face. The butler looked at it for a long time. The more he looked, the angrier he was. He almost tore the drawing. Damn it. Even the Tianya house didn't record these 2 faces. It was very likely that they were disguised faces. How could he investigate it? If it doesn't work, I can only let the master make the decision. Although the butler was extremely angry, he was not flustered. In his eyes, there was nothing that could baffle the master. After all, the master was the peerless genius who won the first place in the martial arts competition in the Qinghai province. Even satrap Yin said that the master would definitely become the mainstay of the Dahan country. How could such a master be baffled by a sneaky Mr. Li? It was a joke. On the other side, Su forced himself to calm down. He took a letter to the satrap's mansion. Looking at the majestic and towering lintel, Su had mixed feelings. He was slightly dull for a moment. As a foreign prisoner of war, he could enter the satrap's mansion one day. "Stop! What are you doing?" The guard of the satrap's mansion saw Su's furtive behavior and immediately came up to ask. Su looked serious. He didn't lose face for the Leanly building. He said in a calm tone, "I am from the Leanly building. My master has a letter and wants the third child of the Yin family to read it in person." "The Leanly building?" The guard's expression changed slightly. As a new force rising in the Qinghe town, the name of the winery had been known by many people in the Qinghe town. Naturally, they had heard of it, and it was said that the third child of the Yin family had met the boss of the Leanly building once. Thinking of this, the guard relaxed and said, "Wait a moment. I will go in and report." Chapter 94. A letter from Mr. Li. In the study, Yin Zai received the notice and felt confused. He couldn't help but think of the mysterious woman who was calm all the time in the prisoner camp. "Let him come in." Yin Zai waved his hand. He didn't have a close relationship with Mr. Li. The letter came suddenly. He also wanted to know what the woman was going to do. After a while, Su walked into the study and saw Yin Zai. He couldn't help but be shocked. Wasn't this the lieutenant general that he met in the prisoner camp that day? Yin Zai only felt that the person was familiar. After thinking for a while, he remembered that he was one of the prisoners that Mr. Li brought back. He didn't expect that after half a month, the spirit of this person was completely different. He didn't have the breath of a prisoner camp. Mr. Li's means of training people are really superb. Yin Zai couldn't help but praise. Su was annoyed and couldn't help but refute. "Master, you are wrong. We didn't receive any training in the Leanly building. Everything is voluntary. As Mr. Li taught us, if we want to change our fate, we can only rely on ourselves. Mr. Li just gave us a chance." Before he finished his words, the maid standing beside Yin Zai immediately scolded him. "How dare you? You're just a servant who delivers a letter. How can you speak here? Kneel down and apologize for your mistake." Su's eyelids trembled. There was a little fear in his eyes, but he didn't kneel down. Instead, he looked at the maid who scolded him angrily. He didn't avoid her eyes and even looked stubborn. The maid was immediately annoyed. When she was about to call someone, Yin Zai waved his hand and said with a smile, "Ling, you can leave." "Master." The maid felt wronged and couldn't help but stamp her feet. But in the end, she didn't dare to disobey Yin Zai and left with hatred. Su also felt bad. If Yin Zai didn't speak, he was likely to be driven out by the Yin family and even beaten. But even if he knew the result, he didn't want to lose his self-esteem. Yin Zai looked at Su with appreciation. Although in his opinion, Su's impulse was worthless, not everyone had such courage. There were only two people left in the room. Su remembered the business and quickly put the unwrinkled envelope gently on the table. Yin Zai took it and opened it. There was only a thin piece of letter paper with only one line of words in it. "Child Yin, the Leanly building still remembers the help of the prisoner camp. Can you come to the Leanly building tomorrow night and drink osmanthus wine with me?" It was just an invitation. Yin Zai was puzzled and felt that Mr. Li was more unpredictable. However, he had nothing to do now. The Leanly building was not a dangerous place. It was better to go and have a look. Thinking of this, Yin Zai nodded slightly and said with a smile, "Your name is Su, right?" Leanly, Yin said. "Child," Yin nodded and said. Receiving a reply, Su's face lit up with joy. He quickly lowered his body and nodded. "My master will be waiting for you tomorrow." Seeing Su leave, Yin Zai was a little envious. The new servant of Mr. Li could be so clever. Why didn't he have any talented people around him? Yin suddenly. Tisu Tian. Yin for 2 days in a row, the Leanly building was peaceful and there was no accident. Fang Yuan and Chu Qingning both sensed something unusual. The Jin family was in the dark and they were in the light. The situation was not good for them. When Suli got the news, her eyes flashed and she didn't say anything. Fang Yuan didn't ask more consciously. That night, Yin Zai came to the Leanly building alone in casual clothes. He was immediately welcomed to the top floor. The Leanly building was like a tower. There was only one room on the top floor. It was spacious, but the layout was much more chic and elegant than that downstairs. Yin Zai stood outside the door and looked at Su Li, who stood by the window with her back to him. He couldn't help but say with a smile, "Mr. Li is really in a good mood. It must be a special feeling to appreciate the moon on the top floor. But the Lantern Festival has passed. Today's moon is new." Su Li turned around. She didn't wear a bamboo hat, but a veil. Her black hair was in a bun with a green hairpin. It complemented the simple decoration in the room. She was extremely fresh. "Child Yin, you are really punctual." After praising him, Su Li chuckled under the veil. She walked lightly and sat opposite to Yin Zai. Then she poured a cup of osmanthus wine for him. Yin Zai smiled slightly and took a sip. His eyes suddenly brightened. He sighed and said, "I have practiced martial arts since I was a child. I am not a greedy person. I have drunk a lot of wine, but none of them is as gentle as the wine brewed by Mr. Li. It is like a beautiful woman in the water town of the south of the Yangtze River." "Child, you must be joking. Speaking of wine, you are much better than those who claim to be immortals in wine." Su Li smiled lightly and said, "However, Child Yin doesn't hesitate at all. Aren't you afraid that I will poison the wine?" Yin Zai's smile froze. He slowly put down the wine cup in his hand, but he didn't panic. Instead, he said calmly, "What do you mean? Is it possible that someone dares to poison me in the Qinghe town?" Su Li picked up the flagon and poured herself a cup. Her tone gradually became ethereal. "Child, you are wrong again. Whether you dare or not is different from whether you are willing or not. At least for me, if I want you to die, I can do it without any trace. Even if Satrap Yin knows it, he could do nothing about it." Yin Zai's left hand, hidden under the table, trembled slightly. He looked more and more uneasy. It seemed that a cold breath rose from the soles of his feet and went straight to the top of his head. Mr. Li was not a good person. He felt a little regret in his heart. One could know a person's face, but not his heart. Moreover, he didn't even see Mr. Li's true face. If he knew it, he wouldn't be so arrogant and come alone. At this time, Su Li chuckled and said, "However, Child Yin, don't worry. Since I invited you to taste wine, I will not harm you." Not only would he not harm you, he would even protect you. With young master's intelligence and wisdom, you should be able to figure this out, right? Yin Zai was suddenly enlightened when Su Li pointed out the stakes. Yes, the Leanly building invited him above board. If they really poisoned him, the Leanly building would be destroyed early. It would only bring disaster to the Leanly building early. For the sake of the Leanly building, Mr. Li naturally wanted to protect him. After figuring it out, Yin Zai didn't feel relaxed. Instead, there was a layer of cold sweat on his forehead. The rhythm of the conversation was completely controlled by the mysterious woman. His thoughts were simply swayed by her. It was not his turn to make decisions. Su Li shook the clear wine in her hand and said lightly, "Child Yin, don't be nervous. Today, I invite you to taste wine. Of course, there are other things. Child, please look down the stairs." Hearing that Su Li talked about business, Yin Zai immediately felt relaxed. He stood up and held the stairs to look down to the first floor. He saw a middle-aged man in a black silk robe sitting downstairs with an arrogant face. But it was too noisy in the building, so he couldn't hear what he was talking about. "Isn't he the butler of the Jean family?" Yin Zai recognized the middle-aged man at a glance. He was surprised and immediately remembered the latest information given to him in the mansion. He suddenly understood. It turned out that the Leanly building was targeted by the Jean family. Mr. Li looked for him because he had something to ask. Yin Zai made up his mind and immediately became calm. It seemed that he took the initiative. He turned around and said bitterly, "The Jean family repeatedly destroyed the industry of the Qinghe town. It's really hateful, but the Jean family has a deep background. Even my father may not be able to stop them from plotting against Mr. Li's winery. Mr. Li, I'm afraid that you are asking the wrong person this time." When he said this, Yin Zai raised his head, only to be met with a pair of pitch-black eyes that seemed to be smiling, yet not smiling. There was a faint trace of mockery in them. The deep darkness was like a boundless hell, causing one to involuntarily sink into it. Yin Zai's heart thumped, and he couldn't help but step back. It seemed that things were not as he thought. "Child, are you kidding?" Suli put down the wine cup and leaned lazily on the back of the chair. She said, "When did I say that? Do I ask you to help me this time?" "No." Yin Zai was confused. Then why did she ask him to look at the first floor? The Leanly building is a place for business. I asked you to come here because I have a deal to talk about. Su Li's eyes became soft like a peerless enchantress. She said, "Are you interested?" Yin Zai frowned and sat down again. "What's there to talk about between you and me?" Mr. Li didn't have what he wanted. He couldn't do what Mr. Li asked. Yin Zai felt that Su Li's deal had failed before she said it. But Su Li looked confident and said, "Of course, there are many things. For example, your sister always wants to be a general and your dream in your heart. If you don't mind, I can help you realize it. But what you have to pay is actually very little." Hearing this, Yin Zai's face finally changed dramatically, and his expression was full of horror. Who on earth was Mr. Li? How did he know about his family matters, and even guess what he was thinking? It was impossible. Yin Zai didn't believe it at all. Su Li gently took a sip of the sweet wine, and there was a vague recollection in her eyes. In the previous life, someone wrote a biography for Yin Hongxiu, but it was not a glorious history. She was remembered as the wife of Jin Chung Ao, the first child of the Jin family. Her tragic life was blocked by the Jin family, but the biography circulating in the martial arts circle couldn't be blocked by the Jin family. Su Li had read it carefully in the previous life. After all, she was also from the Qinghai province. Naturally, she was interested in the people in the Qinghai province. The person who wrote the biography obviously knew Yin Hongxiu very well. It described in detail the agreement between Yin Hongxiu and her father at home when she was a child. The third brother, who had the closest relationship with her, was also mentioned repeatedly. The most mentioned was that Yin Zai yearned for freedom and was extremely eager to be a free chivalrous man in the martial arts circle. But it was almost impossible for Yin Zai, who was from an official family, to realize his dream. Child's dream is a taboo. Your origin is destined to make what you want become an extravagant hope. But it is not difficult for me to solve it. Su Li said obscurely, but Yin Zai understood. He suddenly fell into a deep silence. After a long time, he smiled bitterly and said, "Don't joke, Mr. Li. The trajectory of my life has been fixed. There is no need to struggle." At this moment, Yin Zai completely removed his disguise, and all his thoughts were written on his face. He had no secrets in front of Su Li. "Oh, really?" Su Li tilted her head and supported half of her cheek with her right hand. She said softly, "I said it is not difficult. If you don't believe it, you can let your sister have a try." The agreement between the fourth sister and my father? Yin Zai took a deep breath and shook his head. "That is even more impossible. To be honest, even my father can't pull the bow that my father gave to my sister. My father is not only the satrap, but also the first senior in the Qinghai town. It is said that only the legendary." Chapter 95. In front of Yin Zai, there was a cup of wine standing in the air, as if it was held by an invisible hand. Such a strange scene made Yin Zai's mouth dry. He hesitated to say the first half of the sentence. Only the inborn senior can pull it away. Su Li chuckled and then opened her palm. The wine cup hanging in the air was immediately pulled back to Su Li's hand. As for the legendary CNT on stage, the most obvious sign is telekinesis. "Child Yin, am I right?" Su Li's low and magnetic voice rang in his ears. Yin Zai felt cold all over. He looked straight ahead and couldn't make any expression on his face. This woman, who seemed to be in her 20s, turned out to be an inborn senior. The legendary inborn senior who could fight against tens of thousands of troops by himself. His mind exploded and turned blank. From childhood, he constantly heard rumors about the inborn senior. He didn't expect that he would meet one so easily today. And he even wanted to make trouble for her before? Yin Zai's heart was in turmoil. Countless thoughts came to his mind in an instant. The Jean family even wanted to make trouble for the inborn senior? It was as if the god of longevity had hung himself. He was tired of living. I always don't like killing. So, even if the Jean family makes things difficult for me, and even secretly sends warriors here, I just accept all the orders and don't fight back. But it doesn't mean that I'm not angry. Do you know third child Yin? Su Li's words were no longer soft. With the momentum of the inborn realm, it was full of pressure. Yin Zai's back was instantly wet. He immediately nodded to show that he understood. That's good. However, considering the current situation of the Yin family, it's too much to ask you to deal with the Jean family. I'm not an unreasonable person, so I will make a deal with your sister. Can you promise me? Yin Zai was happy and blurted out. It's an honor for my sister to be Mr. Li's apprentice. What's the deal? I'd like to hear the details. Su Li narrowed her eyes slightly and moved her lips. Yin Zai nodded again and again. An hour later, Yin Zai left from the back door of the Linley building. Before he could take a breath, he hurried back to the mansion and found his sister who was still practicing the bow in the martial arts field. Hongxiu. Yin Hongxiu heard the familiar voice and immediately turned back in surprise. She shouted happily, "Third brother, where have you been? I haven't seen you all night." Yin Hongxiu said and walked closer. Then she saw that Yin Zai was sweating as if he was fished out of the water. She suddenly froze. It seemed that she hadn't seen her third brother in such a mess for a long time. Yin Zai looked around and saw that no one was around. He immediately whispered, "Hongxiu, what I'm going to say next is a secret. You must not reveal this to anyone, including father, mother, and Huan. I found you a master who can teach you archery." After that, Yin Zai left in a hurry, leaving Yin Hongxiu, who was confused, muttering to herself, "What master? Aren't there many masters who practice archery at home?" Third brother is acting strange today. After Yin Zai left the Linley building, there was chaos in the hall on the first floor. Go back and tell Jin Shang Ao. Don't think that you can do whatever you want just because someone in your family is an official in the imperial court. Our Jin family doesn't buy it. In Xuedong looked angry. Her delicate rebuke made the entire winery quiet, and all the guests who were drinking were stunned. Kim family. Which Kim family? Is there any Kim family in the Qinghe town? Of course, it's that Kim family. Some people couldn't help but whisper, "Tut tut, the Kim family is really unscrupulous. They want to take advantage of everything. Do they really think that they're the local tyrants in the Qinghe town? Hush, be quiet. Don't talk nonsense. Be careful of your life." However, the Linley building is targeted by the Kim family. I'm afraid that it will be dangerous. This winery seems to have no background. Hearing the discussions around him, Butler Jin's face was livid. Since he became the chief butler of the Jin family, he had never been so humiliated. It was a great shame. How dare the Linley building offend them? Butler Jin pointed at In Xuedong, who was about to cry. It seemed that it was a trick of a bully to bully a weak girl. Many drinkers couldn't stand it. Immediately, a tall and strong man stood up and said in a rough voice, "Old bastard, what are you doing? Get out of here. If you don't care, I'll beat you to death." Someone took the lead, and immediately a group of people who were drunk stood up and jeered. "Yes, I don't like your Jin family for a long time. Get out of here. Don't get out. Beat them to death." Lao Li, whose face was red, picked up the stool and threw it at them. Crack! Butler Jin dodged awkwardly. The stool fell to the ground and made a crisp sound, but it was like a fuse, which aroused the ferocity of the drunkards. Go up and beat them. Go up. Those who are afraid of death are idiots. The scene suddenly became chaotic. The tables and chairs were mixed with drinks and pastries. In Xuedong didn't expect that the effect was so good. She quickly took people to hide in the back hall and let the people in the front hall fight. Hearing the screams coming from outside from time to time, In Xuedong couldn't help but smile. There is a saying that the law couldn't punish the masses. Butler Jin was beaten for nothing today, but the Jin family would definitely blame it on them. What should they do? I learned another trick from Su Li. It's so cool. Chu Qingning smiled and rubbed Yin Xuedong's soft hair. He said, don't think about it. Since Su Li asked us to do this, she must have other tricks. Let's do it. Yin Xuedong answered softly. Then she hesitated and whispered, Su Li is so powerful and beautiful. Will you? Chu Qingning was stunned and immediately showed an extremely frightened expression. He rubbed Yin Xuedong's chubby face and scolded her with a smile. Little girl, what are you thinking about? Su Li is such a tigress. I can't afford to provoke her. Only Fang Yuan, the masochist. Yin Xuedong held back her laughter and pointed behind Chu Qingning. Chu Qingning seemed to feel something and couldn't help but look back. Suddenly, he saw Su Li and Fang Yuan standing by the door. He didn't know how long they had been listening. Chu Qingning was immediately scared to death. Ah, Xuedong, you're also bad. You even hurt me. With the screams of Chu Qingning and Butler Jean, there was a burst of laughter in the back hall. After the chaos, Butler Jean was beaten black and blue and fled awkwardly. The drinkers gradually sobered up and immediately realized what a stupid thing they had done. They slipped away at the same time. Before leaving, they did not forget to leave money for the drinks. Insu and the others felt great when they saw this. They had long disliked Butler Jean. They had thought that the Leanly building would definitely be humble or compromise with the Jean family. They were still worried about their situation. They did not expect that the attitude of the superior was so resolute. I hope Mr. Li and others can make it. Insu and others prayed secretly. When the winery was in trouble, their cohesion immediately improved significantly. On the top floor, Su Li stood on the edge of the stairs. Chu Qingning and Fang Yuan, who were beaten into a panda's face, stood behind her. They were all speechless. What are you going to do next? Fang Yuan couldn't help but ask. In this way, they undoubtedly offended the Jean family. As the saying goes, people don't fight with officials. They violated the taboo. Next, they would face a storm of attacks. Maybe the winery will be closed tomorrow. Even if we don't do it, the winery will be closed tomorrow. Su Li said in a heavy tone. Jin Chang-ao's patience is limited. He won't do it more than 3 times. If we don't agree today, their means will be endless. So, we have a lot to do tonight. Fang Yuan and Chu Qingning frowned at the same time. From her tone, why did they feel that Su Li knew Jin Chang-ao very well? Before everyone had a rest, Su Li and others told Haydn to be on guard. Then they changed into night clothes and went out of the city. Chu Qingning saw that Su Li used her martial arts movement, and her speed was no less than theirs. He was so shocked that he widened his eyes. It turned out that Su Li knew martial arts, and it seemed that her realm was not low. She had been hiding it. When Chu Qingning thought of everything in the past 6 months, he felt angry. In the end, Su Li had been guarding against them all the time. Fang Yuan's reaction was much calmer than that of Chu Qingning. As early as when Su Li healed Fang Mu, he had some doubts. Now it just confirmed the speculation in his heart. Thinking of those gangsters he killed in the South Street of the Desu town a long time ago, Su Li was accustomed to the bloody scene. Fang Yuan was slightly nervous. Su Li, did she kill people? How many did she kill? Su Li flew against the night wind, but she didn't mean to explain. The new moon was gradually wrapped in heavy clouds, and the scenery under the whole night sky became dreamy. Su Li, where are we going? We have been out of the city for an hour. Chu Qingning whispered impatiently. He hadn't reached the acquired 8th hurdle, so he hadn't mastered the ability to condense sounds into lines. Su Li's lips moved, and her clear voice came into the ears of Chu Qingning and Fang Yuan. Chu Qingning, from now on, you can't speak. Listen to my order. Fang Yuan, communicate with me in sound transmission. Don't leave any evidence. Then, Su Li handed 2 bone-changing pills to them. These 2 pills were her new attempt. The effect of camouflage was stronger, but the relative duration was much shorter. So, she didn't give them to them until now. Chu Qingning took a breath and felt that his heart, liver, spleen, lungs, and kidneys were all hurt. Originally, Fang Yuan's cultivation was higher than his, and he could comfort himself that Su Li didn't know martial arts. But now Su Li's real cultivation was also after the acquired 8th hurdle. How could he live? In the past, I could be the first genius of the family. But since I met Su Li, my cultivation talent is actually low. 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 For a moment, Chu Qingming's eyes were slightly moist, and he felt wronged. Fan Yuan's eyes flashed. He was still thinking about what the green starlight was. He guessed Su Li's cultivation realm, so he was not surprised. Is that where we are going? At this time, Su Li stopped and pointed to a mountain. Under the dim starlight, they could vaguely see a small camp on the top of the mountain. The fire was like fireflies. Fan Yuan and Chu Qingming's faces changed slightly. What are we going to do there? You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.